might have seen Jason popping out to the grocery store in his white Range Rover or his
Yeah, we're off.
$400,000 Aston Martin DB5U. Momoa drives the same model as James Bond in Goldfinger and Casino Royale. But one of Jason's most interesting purchases is his 1955 pink Cadillac, which
Somewhere over the rainbow, where high. Hi, darling. Good to see ya. There's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Well, somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare dream, they really do come true. Someday I wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where trouble smells like lemon drops, away above the chimney tops. That's where you find me. Well, somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true.
See, that's good guitar.
I wish upon a star, and I wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where trouble smells like lemon drops, away above the chimney tops. That's where you find me. Well, somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly, birds over the rainbow. Why, little, why can't I? If birds fly over the rainbow, why? Then, oh, why can't
I love that song.
Come along and feel the warmth of an Aveo community. So many of the amenities you're looking for in retirement living and a special sense of belonging. Take the first step to great retirement living this winter. Call for a chat or visit the website.
You're either looking at this succulent fish patty, tangy tartare, and melty cheese, thinking, yum, or, but why? There is no in between. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Crystal McVeigh wasn't having a dream. She had died and says she woke up in heaven.
And it was this guy that I had run from my whole life.
Her journey away from him began when she was molested at 3 years old.
I grew up believing that I was disgusting and broken and filthy.
Crystal went to church with her mother. When she was 8, she accepted Christ and was baptized. She hoped that would cleanse her from the guilt and shame of being molested. But the abuse continued until she was 12 years old.
I decided that there were two options. Either one, there was a God and he didn't love me for whatever reason, because he hadn't stopped the things that had happened in my life. He hadn't saved me. Or two, there was no God.
In her teen years, Crystal started using drugs and alcohol and was promiscuous. By the time she was 21, Crystal was a divorced mother with 2 children. Finally, at 28, she settled down and married Virgil, and they had twins. 10 months later, in December 2009, doctors performed a routine procedure that triggered pancreatitis. She had complications and ended up with a 110-degree fever. Her mother, Bonnie, came to the hospital.
She didn't look right. She looked swollen to me. They had put her on a pain pump.
I felt very calm and very peaceful. I remember opening my eyes and seeing my mom sit at the chair at the foot of my bed, and I told her that I loved her.
She felt cold, and when I looked up, her lips were blue, and she wasn't breathing. And I turned around, and her face was black. And I just started screaming, she's dead, she's dead. The nurse told me, she said, you need to leave, and I told her, I'm not going anywhere.
We need the crash cart in here.
For the next 9 minutes, doctors and nurses tried to resuscitate Crystal. About that time, Crystal's husband Virgil arrived.
everything went through my mind? I didn't know if she was alive. I didn't know if she was dead.
I know why they didn't want me in there. It's violent. And so her 9 minutes in heaven were my 9 minutes in hell.
While the team worked to revive her, Crystal says she was in heaven.
The first thing I remember becoming aware of was that I was still me. And I was still the me who had just told my mother that I loved her and died. And I was very aware of the fact that I had just died. But I was also the me that had existed from the moment that God had created me. The light came to me as if I was in the middle of the tunnel, yet it went on for eternity. I remember being so at peace and so bathed in this light and this love.
She knew she was in the presence of God.
I didn't see a face. I didn't see any features other than this beautiful light. And words like amazing and perfect and beautiful, they fall so drastically short. I could not get enough of him. I could not breathe enough of him in. I could not get close enough to the light, and the light was all over me.
Then Crystal says she tried to ask God a question.
I wanted to know why he didn't love me, or why he lets bad things happen. And yet, as I stood in front of him and I faced him and I fell to my knees and I raised my hands, the question I called out to him was, why didn't I do more for you? Because in an instant, he revealed his true self to me, which is love. I had never truly worshiped God ever in my entire life, but I fell in front of him and I worshiped him. And as I lay there in worship and awe of this creator, I remember saying I could worship you for eternity.
Crystal traveled with God down a tunnel toward the gates of heaven. She noticed a small child ahead of her.
She wore a bonnet on her head and she had a little white basket in her hand. I watched her pick her basket up and dip it in the light. She would scoop it and then she would dump the light out as if it was water, and the light would cascade out of her basket, and she would throw her head back and she would laugh. And every time she laughed, every time she moved, my spirit began to swell as if it was a balloon with love.
God revealed to Crystal that she was seeing herself at 3 years old.
She was me at the moment that the enemy stepped into my life and whispered that I was worthless, that I was broken, that I was disgusting, that I got everything I deserved. She was the 3-year-old that heard that God didn't love her, that he had abandoned her, that he had forsaken her, and that God didn't exist. And he allowed me to know that he had allowed me to look through his eyes and to see the truth. And the truth set me free.
All of Crystal's doubts about the existence of God and his love for her faded away.
I remember what it felt like to be in chains. And I remember the moment that he took them from me. I was free. And he didn't just say, Crystal, I love you. He allowed me to experience his love, and his love almost made me explode.
Then Crystal says she heard her mother calling her name.
And I said, can I go tell her that I'm okay? And he said, the choice is up to you. And I turned away from this light to go and find where her voice was coming from. And when I turned, he said, tell them what you can remember. And I remember calling back, I'll remember everything and I'll be right back. And I looked down through the floor of this tunnel of heaven. And it was as if I was looking at 1,000,000 shimmering diamonds. And the instant that I noticed those diamond-like substances, I was back in my body.
Crystal woke up in the hospital surrounded by the medical team.
And I turned to my mom, who was crying, and I told her that I was in heaven, that I was with God, and that I was in the most beautiful light, and that I was okay.
Crystal left the hospital 8 days later. She'll tell you she left there a different person.
My life has completely changed. The person that died in that hospital room was not the same person who came back in so many different ways. But the difference is that I know that there is a God who loves us. I know that there's a Father who really is listening to us, who really is holding us.
Crystal has written about her journey in her New York Times best-selling book called Waking Up in Heaven.
People often ask me, what is your message? What message did he send you back with? And it is so simple that it just doesn't matter who we are, where we've been, what's been done to us, what we've done, that his love is so vast and so great that it encompasses everything. And that we have that love not for anything that we've done to deserve it, but because he finds us worthy and because he gives us the choice to choose him.
When you run a hospitality business, you get ahead because of the support around you. Tyro has been an innovation leader for almost 20 years, so you get the best payments and business banking support we can give to keep you moving forwards. Tyro, better business banking.
Stan's mind-bending brand new series is a high-octane, edge-of-your-seat thrill ride.
How'd you like to come and save the world with us? We're a top-secret organisation dedicated to undoing mass extinction events, and we can make time go backwards. Welcome to the Lazarus Project.
The brand new series, The Lazarus Project, now streaming only on Stan.
Brittany Bacon-Hester was a precocious 3-year-old.
She knew Bible scripture. She was singing in church all by herself. Just loved life, full of life.
That all changed one morning when her mother Jamie heard a strange noise coming from Brittany's room.
Like a gurgling, like a can't breathe, struggling noise. I immediately just picked her up and said, "Oh God, touch her."
Brittany was having a grand mal seizure. Her parents rushed her to the doctor, and Brittany was diagnosed with epilepsy, a condition all too familiar to Jamie.
I understood it because I had them myself. So I thought she'd be just like me. I'd get her on medicine and everything would be all right.
It wasn't that simple. Brittany's doctor started her on the first of many medications, but the seizures just got worse.
She couldn't sit up and she couldn't look at me to focus. And when I'd call her name, she was just totally out of it, just totally gone. As a mother, you feel so responsible. They're your flesh. They've lived in you. And when she would pull at me to help her and I couldn't, I blamed myself a lot. I thought, I've given my daughter this sickness.
Over the course of the next 2 years, Brittany's illness took its toll on her parents.
Physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, even financially. One bottle of medication would cost $50 and we couldn't afford it.
She needed 24-hour-a-day care. I mean, it didn't matter if it was night or day, the seizures continued.
Brittany had to wear a helmet to protect her head from injury, while her parents turned to God's word for comfort.
God gave me my promise. In Psalms 37, 4 and 5, he said, "Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart." God said, don't look at what you see. Look at what you don't see. Tell me and speak what you want. I put her in the car and I started down the road and I ended up at a school playground. And I said, God, that's what I want. I want my little girl back, normal, like those kids I see that's running and playing. And he said, it will come to pass.
The doctors, on the other hand, gave a different report.
She had been in the hospital for almost 3 weeks, and they had tried everything. They ran one more brainwave, and they said her whole brain's seizuring, so we can't even take out the part of the brain or put a shunt in or to help her. There's nothing else we can do. They just said, just let her go home where she'll be more peaceful in her own bed. I just knew she was close to death. And I thought, Lord, it's not time because you said that you would bring it to pass.
Jamie spent a sleepless night praying for her daughter's recovery. That morning, Brittany began to speak.
She kept saying, Jesus, Jesus. And I could tell by the look on her face and her eyes that, well, she's responding, and she hasn't responded or talked to me for a good year at all. So, and she could look at me and describe Jesus, with eyes like fire and the bright lights and the angels. You could tell a 5-year-old child that. I knew that she had encountered Christ.
When they took Brittany back to the doctor,
they were amazed. They just looked at her and pretty much just said the same thing, that we see the healing in her eyes. And they knew that one of the nurses said it's a higher power. I said, yes, Jesus, he healed her.
A couple of months after Brittany was healed,
Jamie began having headaches.
My doctor thought it was just the stress I went through. But every time I'd take my medicine, my headaches would be stronger.
Jamie's neurologist performed an EEG and found out why.
He said, a miracle's taken place. Your brainwave's now clear. Would you like to come off your medicine? And sure enough, I did. And I have been seizure-free and drug-free for 18 years.
Brittany is now in college, studying to be a psychologist. She still loves to sing in church.
The Lord is my helper. I will not fear.
And she still remembers her encounter with Jesus Christ.
Just had the glory of God shone upon him, and the angels were all around him, front, behind, everywhere. There was angels, and it was just wonderful. You just felt so peaceful and so at ease, and all I can say is there's nothing like it, and I've never experienced anything like it on this earth.
Today, both Brittany and her mother are completely healthy.
I had heard from God, and God kept his promise. And he will, and he does.
I always felt different being a Muslim, but it was kind of a good thing. It always gave me the confidence that I was following the right faith. I always believed that Allah was God, but growing up in high school, I wanted to have fun. Like I saw everybody else having fun. And it's like, what's fun about not smoking pot? What's fun about not drinking? What's fun about not partying? It's like what everybody does to have fun, and people, it's fun. So I wanted to do that. And later on, when I become a parent and I'm raising children, then I'll be a good Muslim. I always had a love for music, and I had a passion for music. I really, really wanted to just do something in the music business, something in the music. I just had a love for it. The day that Eddie met me, the Lord spoke to him and said, I want you to take Khalid on the road with you. I'm going to save him. And it's kind of funny because it was right after 9/11 had happened, and Eddie was not trying to take no Muslim into his, to his ministry. I thought this was my big break. I thought it was my chance to be fair. I could care less about Jesus, but I wanted to learn what I could from Eddie and then just go and do my own thing. First place we went to was Nashville, Tennessee. My friend David got bitten on his hand by a bug or an insect or something, and his hand started swelling up, and I was thinking maybe we need to get some type of cream or go to a doctor or something. It didn't look like it was getting any better. The mother of the house we're staying with came up to David and said, I'm going to pray for you. I want to believe that God will heal your hand, that Jesus is going to heal your hand. And I thought, this lady has got to be out of her mind. Jesus healing a hand. I said, that's the stuff they do on TV. It's like, give me a break. Who believes that crap? Right in front of my face, the swelling goes away. And you couldn't even tell he had anything wrong with his hand.
Wow.
I had an infection in my mouth. My wisdom teeth were growing in crooked. But I also had an infection around my wisdom teeth, which is like pain on top of pain. I didn't get any sleep ever. It had been going on for like a good 2 weeks of just nonstop pain. So I walked up to her. I said, can you do for my mouth what I saw you do for his hand? And when she started praying for me, it was like gone. I knew it was gone. I just needed a minute to come to grips with what just happened. I remember sitting in the chair after she prayed for me. I sat down and I go, oh my God, my whole life is going to change. Of course, everybody says, do you feel any pain? Are you healed? I said, I've been having medicine all day long. Just let me go to bed. I'll sleep on it, and I'll tell you in the morning. So I ran downstairs, and they had these sugar molasses cookies. And I started shoving them in my mouth, letting it marinate and trying to push it around in there, trying to agitate it, get the pain working. And there was absolutely no pain. And I began to really start freaking out. I started punching myself in the face, trying to make some type of pain in my teeth and my face. And I realized that Jesus was God. I never knew that God would be involved in a human life so personal that he would set them free and deliver them, and that he would care enough to do that and intervene. It was a month after I got healed. We went to this conference in Alabama, and it was the first time I heard the voice of the Lord, and the Lord spoke to me and said, if you want to know if this is real, get up and see for yourself. I just lifted my hands and I closed my eyes and I just said, okay, Lord, just show me whatever you want to show me. And they began to pray for me, and my knees just turned like rubber, and I just fell and hit the ground. I couldn't stand. I said, okay, Lord, for real, God, Jesus, whoever. I said, I really want to know you. I really want you to give me all that you got. And so I just raised my hands, and with nobody touching me, nobody laying hands, I just fell over like a ton of bricks. I felt like I left my body, and I kept going up and up, like through the roof. And I feel like the Lord took me to heaven. The best way for me to describe it was that if love had a color, it's all that I saw. I have never experienced or felt a love like I have, and a peace that I had felt in that moment. I just had an encounter with him, and it didn't matter to me what he was. I knew I wanted to live for that God. And he gave me a promise when I first gave my life to him that he was going to save my whole family. He's going to start with my sister, my mother, and then my father. So since then, my sister has come to the Lord, and a couple years after that encounter, my mother came to Christ, and so now they're both serving the Lord, and we're just believing the Lord to fulfill what he said he was going to do, and go ahead and save my dad. I'm just so happy that I found Christ, and that I have a heavenly Father who even today, I'm if to be honest, I'm not good enough, but I have a heavenly Father who loves me even in my weakness. And
hey, shalom, everyone. Welcome to Prophecy Roundtable. Again, we don't really promise you all the answers, but we are going to have a lot of fun talking about it. Tonight, we are looking at the day of the Lord and the heavenly signs that just might precede it. So, of course, I have my amazing and intrepid co-host here to help flesh out this amazing topic. So, if everybody has a question in the chat, just go ahead and put it in. We'll do our best to get to it. But, guys, let's start off with the day of the Lord. This is something that appears at least, 30 sometimes maybe in Scripture. What does this mean? Are some key passages that we should take a look at to get into this topic tonight?
Well, I think Acts 2.
Acts 2, okay. All right.
Well, doesn't Peter talk about it there? Well, he talks about Joel. So the passage of Joel is clearly the sort of the pivotal one.
Okay.
And Matthew 24.
We'll go to Joel, and we'll take a look at that. All right. So here it is. So, alas, for the day of the Lord, for the day of the Lord is at hand. It shall come as destruction from the Almighty. Right? Food's cut off. All these things are happening. The beasts are unhappy, etc. Right? Then we got these locust type things that are coming. That apparently look like horses. That's all going to happen. This is all before the day of the Lord. Is that correct? That's what I'm sure.
I mean, that's what the text says, but
yeah. So yeah, I think this is key. And I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the coming of the great awesome day of the Lord. Like that seems kind of significant that these things are going to happen before the day of the Lord. All right, so
why don't we talk about what some of the different views are the day of the Lord?
Yeah.
Okay, so look, we'll start with the one that I know best, probably because I was raised in it. The pre-trib view is that, and this is, I think, where we have criticized the pre-trib view, is that there is a conflation of terms in that the tribulation period, the 7-year period, is conflated with the wrath of God, conflated with the day of the Lord. And in a number of cases, the whole 7-year period is considered by some of them to be the Great Tribulation. So I think there's a problem with that because Matthew 24, is it 21? says, then shall be great tribulation, which is a period of time after the abomination of this desolation. So, but what the pre-trib people will say, the day of the Lord is the entire 7-year period and continuing on into the millennium. There are others that say no, the day of the Lord cannot start until there's been these cosmic signs that you just read in Joel, which I think is pretty clear. The day of the Lord starts after those cosmic signs. So when we look at the pre-trib view, they would say they never seem to talk about the cosmic signs.
Well, John, what you know this as a lawyer, right? Whenever your case is weak on a certain area, or there is, we kind of have an obligation in court, even as secular lawyers, to be honest with the court and even give them negative case law or negative law, if you will. A lot of times you see this where a lot of these, and I'm not going to denigrate them, but a lot of these guys that are really, really smart and love Jesus, no doubt, they will just completely ignore certain passages. I mean, they'll never, ever, ever even touch them with a 20-foot pole, much less try to explain them away, like 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, and they'll skip 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 1 through 4, and go. And I had a sweet lady, man. She is the nicest lady ever. She's a charismatic Catholic. We had dinner with her last night. She's the one that brought it up. I didn't do it. And she says, but the church is the Holy Spirit restraining the Antichrist and evil. And I quickly realized that we just needed to have another discussion about another thing, because it was very important to her. So I didn't want to ruin our dinner.
Yeah. So, but I do think that I don't think I'm misrepresenting the view, and if I am, that the day of the Lord is equivalent to the tribulation period. So my question is, when does this? Because Joel, and I don't know, can they make is a distinction made, because Joel 2:31 says, before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. That's like a really strong day of the Lord. I don't know if they make that distinction or not. I just don't think they talk about it.
Yeah, let me throw in this passage. This is from Malachi. Speaking of the day of the Lord, behold, I will send you Elijah, the prophet, before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. All right, so I think this is important, because this is another before the day of the Lord passage. And I think almost everybody's agreed that one of the two witnesses is going to be Elijah. The other guy, in my opinion, is Moses, but that's neither here nor there at the moment. So Elijah's going to come if he's one of the two witnesses, and the two witnesses are ministering for 3.5 years during the time of the tribulation, the so-called 70th week of Daniel, right? Then that cannot be part of the day of the Lord technically, right? And I think that's kind of what we're getting at here, right? So there's all kinds of stuff happening, and then that corresponds with what Joel is saying, because you're going to have all these signs in the heavens, etc., before the coming of the day of the Lord. And I think this really starts to all come together and to gel, because we know that the two witnesses are going to strike the earth with plagues as often as they desire. They're going to do a lot of crazy stuff, right? So they're going to strike the waters and turn them to blood, at least a third of them. They're going to cause it to not rain for 3.5 years, which will lead to things like, I don't know, how about a third of the trees and the grass burning up? Seems logical to me. How about massive starvation all over the earth? Seems very logical when you don't have rain. All these things the two witnesses are doing. But I hear you, because I grew up in the same tradition that the pre-trib rapture suggests that the 7-year period is the day of the Lord. And so therefore, because we're not appointed to the day of God's wrath, therefore we have to get a pre-trib rapture out of here, right? That's kind of the bottom line.
But then I never hear, the trump shall sound and we shall be changed and all of that, which I mean, you can't say that's not part of scripture, but then they never talk about all the other stuff that comes before that great and dreadful day of the Lord. Like we've just mentioned, the stuff in Joel, the coming of Elijah it's never discussed. That the day of the Lord can't happen until this other stuff. But then, they shove the two witnesses into usually the first half of the 70th week. I don't know. So I'm just saying it's just sort of like it's just sort of ignored. And then you have the other passage, I think, would be 2 Thessalonians 2. That talks about, I want to pull it up here online.
Right. So, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, we ask you not to be soon shaken. That day will not come.
As though the day of Christ had come.
Right. The day of Christ.
So then let no one deceive by any means. And then for that day will not come, that's not really in the text. That's kind of what people have inserted into the text.
Yeah.
Right. That's not in the Greek text.
Yeah.
Let no one deceive you by any means. And the implication is it doesn't come unless the falling away comes first and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition.
Right.
And so and so at this recent talk that I was talking to you about at the Prophecy Watchers conference, where the subject of the talk was demolishing the pre-wrath rapture or something like that. He said, he was drawing circles, so he drew a circle around for that day will not come. And what does that day that will not come refer to? Does it refer to the gathering together that we see in verse 1, or is it the day of Christ or the day of the Lord in verse 2? And he said it's the day of the Lord. And then I don't know what he did to get around the other two conditions that seem to come up here. So there's a dispute. And then I would say the other dispute among people is the day of the Lord a day? Is it a 124-hour period? Or are there multiple days of the Lord?
Scott's saying it's 1,000 years.
Well, no, I think that the day of the Lord can be I personally think it's a longer period. But it certainly starts at some time, but it's like an era, I guess.
I believe it starts on the seventh day as this age ends. And obviously the first part of that day is not really good news for those out of faith.
I think if we look at on a calendar perspective versus what are the daily events, what's happening on planet Earth perspective, right? Let's just say for argument's sake that the day of the Lord is going to happen in 20 years. It doesn't matter what's happening geopolitically, that's when it starts, right? And so I think God is on his own timetable. Yeah.
Are you saying we're going to be around here for 20 more years?
I'm not saying. I'm just throwing a number out here.
Okay, well, listen, if that's the case, then I want to be a preterist. I'm becoming a preterist because then I don't have to worry about it.
Hey, like I texted John, we can handle the legal mandate. We can let other people handle entertainment and politics and education. We'll just deal with the law. So, and we'll take over the world for the kingdom.
Well, let's go to another passage because I think this one is incredibly germane to this discussion, and in my opinion, it really limits when the day of the Lord can happen. All right, so the lofty looks of man will be humbled, the haughtiness of men shall be bowed down, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. Okay, so the day we're talking about is the day of the Lord. Right? What's going to happen in that day, right? So that only God can be exalted. Well, first of all, we know that people are going to go into the rocks. They're going to hide from the terror of the Lord and glory of his majesty. right? All the haughtiness of man is going to be brought down. The Lord of hosts shall come upon everything proud and lofty, upon all the high mountains and the high towers and all these different things, right? Again, the loftiness of man shall be bowed down, and the haughtiness of men shall be brought low. The Lord alone will be exalted in that day. They shall go into the holes of the rocks and the caves of the earth from the terror of the Lord and the glory of his majesty when he arises to shake the earth mightily. All right, so then let's go to Revelation 13 and let's see what the Antichrist or the beast is doing during this time. So they worship the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast, who was able to make war with him. And he was giving a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and was given authority to continue for 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. All right, so for 42 months, 1,260 days, the beast is talking smack. He's blaspheming God and those who dwell in heaven. So therefore, in Isaiah chapter 2, it's impossible that the day of the Lord could include any period of that 7 years, because in that day, God alone will be exalted, right? So when Jesus comes back and he begins to do a number on the beast, the beast is not going to be boasting anymore. He is going to be really sad that he rumbled with the wrong guy, right? He rumbled with the wrong God, I should say, and then he's going to be in big trouble, right? And if you parallel this with Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, God is saying the same thing. I'm going to bring judgment upon you. I'm going to do all these things against you, Job, and you're going to really regret it, right? So all the boasting and all the things that the beast is doing will be brought to nothing on that day. So I think there's a number of different ways that we can look at this and try to understand it. But these heavenly things have to happen. There's another passage I want to take a look at, because I think this could be used in defense of more of a pre-trib perspective. And I just want to take a look at it and consider what the language is going on here. So it says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, the powers of the heavens will be shaken. All right, so this is how some people could say, well, see, it's going to be after the tribulation. So they'd say that we're all wet. But here's what I would suggest. In Greek, there is no punctuation, which is a real bummer. All right. So you could easily put right here, after those days, and you could put a colon. Okay. If you put a colon immediately after those days, colon, and now it's giving you a list of what has happened in those days, right? The sun has been darkened, right? The moon has not given its light. The stars have already fallen from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken, right? Jesus is just giving a quick summary here. And when we start to look at all the other places where it talks about this, well, they're numerous. For example, in Revelation chapter 9, we see, right, clearly in the midst of the tribulation period, I saw a star fallen from heaven to earth, and he was given the key to the bottomless pit, right? So all these cosmic signs, these stars falling, by the way, stars in the book of Revelation is always talking about, well, I won't say always, but most of the time it's talking about angels. Not always, but most of the time. So, the stars falling from heaven. If one star fell to the earth, we'd be in big trouble, because that would be the end of the planet. We would just get completely subsumed by a giant star. So it's talking about the fallen angels that are going to be doing their bad stuff. All right. So yeah, I think there's so much evidence showing us that these cosmic signs are going to happen before the day of the Lord. I yield to my colleagues. Scott, you're muted. Okay.
I mean, obviously, I concur. We're preaching to our choirs right now.
All right, let's look at the question. Muriel had a question in the chat. She said, "Are the day of the Lord and the day of Christ, are those the same?"
Jesus is Lord. I mean, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, unless you start like doing some wonky theology, you know, he is Lord. He's called Lord. He's called the Alpha and Omega in Revelation. He's called Lord. So the day of the Lord is no different than the day of Messiah. I think God had a sense of humor, just threw that in so the pre-trib people could.
I would say in some of the more the pre-trib groups that would be more hyper-dispensational, ultra-dispensational, I think the more that they are within that group, they would tend to view the day of Christ in 2 Thessalonians 2 as something different than the day of the Lord. This is what I've read. They would pretty much put it as the rapture. I mean, another thing of the rapture, another indication of the rapture. So that's ultra hyper, and I don't want to misrepresent people. So there were whole books. Harry Ironsides wrote a whole book about wrongly dividing the word of truth to deal with what he viewed as, and he was a pre-trib rapture guy and dispensational, but he wrote a whole book to deal with what he perceived to be some of the errors there, and they're usually pretty strongly King James only.
Do you remember that? I think that was our very first show. We discussed the rightly thing. It was either the first or the second.
Yeah, I want to find out when that started.
The first time rightly divided was used to say rightly divided means this is for the Jews and this is for the church.
Correct.
I think it was Marcion. It was Marcion.
Yeah.
not a pre-trib rapture.
It sort of became popularized. Somebody sent me a very well done article on, if they're listening here. Somebody sent me a really nice thing in Messenger, but Facebook Messenger is a horrible thing to try to find anything in after the fact. So I made a mental note of it. I need to come back and look at that because it was really well done. And of course, I have no idea who sent me that now. So.
Hey, let's look at a passage just to help our audience see that it's not just our opinion, but the Bible is telling us that the day of Christ and the day of the Lord are exactly the same thing. All right, so I'm going to start off in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. All right, so here in this passage, it says, "And to give you who are troubled rest with us when the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven with his mighty angels in flaming fire." Right, take a note of that. Flaming fire, taking vengeance on those who know God, on those who don't.
That was 1985, guys.
So now we're going to go over to Isaiah chapter
that was
66, verse 15.
1985.
All right, for behold, the Lord.
Can you go back? Can you go back real quick? Just real quick.
Yeah. So he's coming with fire. I'll go back in a second. He's coming with fire, with his chariots like a whirlwind to render his anger. That's the same thing, with fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. And for by fire, by his sword, the Lord will judge all flesh, and the slain of the Lord will be many. It's exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing.
Paul was quoting it. I mean, he's not doing it like verse by verse. But this is where, and again, I think I've said this as I spend more and more time studying, in the older scriptures, you'll run across something in Paul, and as you're spending more time studying the Genesis, Deuteronomy, Joshua. No matter what you're studying, you'll start seeing where Paul, he may not be quoting like verbatim, but he's definitely alluding to, even if it's just snippets. Many in his audience at that time, the ones that had been brought up with, learning the word, would have picked up on it. And I think one of the, like you mentioned, Marcion, one of the main problems of dispensationalism is they separate out books as if they're brand new, and they totally ignore the passages that Paul is quoting, alluding to, or even just referring to, and that's how you get this crazy doctrine. That's how it happens. They just totally ignore where Paul is drawing from.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
There's not much new Paul writes. There's really not a lot of new stuff.
And I think they ignore the centrality of the all of the discourse. I just did a sermon on this. I just did.
Diane, I don't know what to say. Your links, they're absolutely stunning. And I hate saying it, but you've got a big famine coming your way. We'll get a famine as well, but you seem to be set up the worst, to be honest. So we're going to go through some great famine very soon.
Rather pathetic sermons on the Olivet Discourse, just because I find it difficult to kind of organize everything into 45-minute segments to present, because there's so many rabbit trails. But one of the books I looked at was a book called And Then the End Will Come, and I think one of the major points of that book was this, to debunk this notion that Matthew chapter 24 is just for Jews. It's just for the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And the point of the author of that book, who I knew, was saying that no, the Olivet Discourse was central to Christian eschatology, and certainly John didn't come along and change it in Revelation. And it was the words of Jesus, and it sort of governed everything. And it's more for us than it is for non-believers, which I think is what some of the pre-trib camp attempt to do with it. Well, they make it more for non-believers.
And I want to touch on this a little bit about the church, but hey, and that's, can you go back to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and chapter 1 real quick, Doug? And then so this is what's interesting. When he comes to be in verse 10, when he comes in that day to be glorified in his saints and to be admired among all those who believe. This epistle, unlike the epistle to the Hebrews, and even the epistle to the Romans, it can be difficult sometimes to understand Paul where he's going with Romans. He's talking to both Jews on one hand, and he's also talking to the Gentiles in the same epistle. Whereas in 2 Thessalonians, this is by and large written to a former Gentile of the nations church. I'm not saying that there were not Jews in this church, but it's very clear they have been misinformed. They have been told they've missed the day of the Lord, and they're still alive, and business is going on as usual. And Paul is just crystal clear that when this happens, it's judgment day. He is revealed in this fire, and then the saints, he's glorified on that day. I think if we just, we've spent some time on chapter 1 before, but I mean, I guess they ignore it for the most part, John. That's sort of been what we've concluded in the past, is they really don't touch one with a 20-foot pole, sort of like Joel passages where it says before the day of the Lord. And then they kind of like, again, sweet lady, love her to death, not disparaging her at all, but just like she did, because she's been taught that. She totally skipped verse 1. His coming, our gathering, will not happen. Let no person deceive you, or Jan Markell, or J.D. Farrak, or any of the teachers. That day will come before, one, the apostasy, and the man of sin is revealed, which I think most camps all agree that's a 3.5-year period when he's revealed. I don't think there is until the very end of the age. I don't think anybody
from when he's revealed till the
yes,
yeah.
The 1260 days or the 12 now, but the 42 months, 1260 days in Revelation, the 1260 in Daniel. You got 2 witnesses there, in which he's given authority. So that's something that we kind of it should be simple. That part should be. He spells it out for us, so that you want to be.
It was amazing, Diane. I showed Gabe, and she said, "Wow!" at the same time. It is amazing. It's beautiful.
Or SDA, and view everything as every year, every day equals a year, all the time, which is what our Reformed brothers do. The historicism view.
Yeah. So, there's a question from Denise Saxton. She says, if Revelation 120 identifies lampstands as the seven churches, why would we look to the Old Testament looking at Moses or Elijah? Also, Jesus himself said that Elijah had already come. So, yes.
When Yeshua said Elijah had already come, he was referring to John the Baptist and the spirit of Elijah. And that's why I believe Doug and I have similar views on the two witnesses. I don't think it's going to be Elijah personally. I think it's going to be someone endowed with that spirit, that anointing, that was handed off to Elisha. Same thing with Moses. I think it will be.
Or it could be two brand new prophets. That nowhere does that exclude them from the Bible. You could have two brand new prophets, the two witnesses.
It will not necessarily be Moses per se, but someone with that gifting, anointing, appointment, if you will. So,
yeah, I just wanted to bring up a passage from Numbers concerning the lampstand. I think there's an unfortunate misunderstanding about what the role of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, better called, is to the New Testament. The New Testament does not supersede or replace or do away with in any way what we have in the Hebrew Bible. It does amplify it sometimes and helps explain it in some ways. And obviously it talks about Messiah, right? But if you have a seven candelabra, a seven, candle candelabra or menorah, that's what that's called. And Jesus is in the midst of that. Well, that's kind of cool, right? And when we look at Numbers chapter 8, speak to Aaron and say to him, when you arrange the lamps, the seven lamps shall give light in front of the lampstand. And Aaron did so. He arranged the lamps to face toward the front of the lampstand as the Lord commanded Moses. Now, when we're thinking about the tabernacle was a copy of that which was in heaven. Okay, so what you had in the tabernacle was first and ideally established in heaven, right? And then it was copied and brought down here, right? So what Aaron and the guys were making for the tabernacle was just the thing that was already up there. In Revelation, we get a glimpse of that Yeshua is in the midst of this lampstand. All right. So while again, the New Testament does give us some very interesting details, and we're grateful for those. And our understanding is enhanced by those. But so does the Old Testament. So does the Hebrew Bible. It gives us a tremendous amount of information. And even the very reason that we think that Moses and Elijah are going to both come is from the Hebrew Bible, right? Because Malachi says that Elijah will come. And just to piggyback on what you were saying, Scott, Elijah, well, John the Baptist came in the spirit of Elijah. There's no question about that. In fact, we even see this very idea that the spirit of Elijah was later placed on Elisha. Okay, now they're two different people, but that spirit that had been on Elijah was then on Elisha. All right, and so
yeah, Lynn, they banned me on Facebook for 30 days, but it's been about 5 weeks now. Open another account on Facebook, but I got to get back to the original account, where you know me from and where everyone knows me from. So I just got to switch accounts. But at the moment, I am on a separate account. That's why you haven't seen me on Facebook.
That same spirit, it was also on John the Baptist. So in a sense, Jesus was not wrong to say that he's already come through the person of John the Baptist. But then we also see him later show up, right? So he says Elisha's come, but then guess what? Elijah does come. He comes on Mount Hermon, on the Mount of Transfiguration. He definitely shows up, right? And so does Moses, right? So these two are showing up just as people were expecting. And I would suggest that because that was not the beginning of the day of the Lord, that was not the day of his vengeance, This is when he was going to set prisoners free that we're still waiting for the day of the Lord. And I think we've already examined some of those things that are telling us what has to come before the day of the Lord. And until those things show up, we have not even gotten to the day of the Lord yet. So
yeah, it's the cosmic signs, and that's what sort of the thought process behind this topic was an old Chuck Missler teaching that I tried to find. I could not find it, and it relates to what we were discussing earlier about the 1260 days and the 42 months and how they're a perfect 30 days. In other words, 2 multiplied by 30 is 1260. And so Missler did a teaching, and I wish I could have found it so I could post it, but he did a teaching on, and I believe this may very well happen. And he had done the research on the ancient calendars, the Mayan, the Inca, Indian, African, Sumerian, that all those ancient calendars had a 360-day year. Egypt had one, and then their later calendars, starting around 500 BC, then went. They still kept it at 360, and they tagged on an extra 5 days. What Chuck's theory was, and what I believe may very well happen, is how we keep time. The revolution. Sorry for any flat Earth people. The revolution of Earth around the sun, taking right now 365 days. That God had changed that at the time of Hezekiah. It went from 360 days, a perfection, and it's now a little wonky and off. And at least the creator, I believe in, who created the sun, moon, and stars, if he wants to revert back to a 30-day pure calendar like it was in Genesis.
Okay, Lynn, thanks for popping in and saying hi. Hope your grandkids are going good.
Because when you look at the flood started, in the second month on the 17th day, and ended in the second month on the 17th day of the 7th month for a perfect 150 days. There's no you do our modern calendar right now with the moon looking at a month, and you do not get 30-day cycles. You do not get 150. That's one reason I reject that Enoch, that at least those portions in Enoch as being canonical or inspired, because they have to add that inter-calendar monthly day, and they get to 151 then. And Genesis is perfect. It's 5 months, 150 days, and then we see over in Revelation, 42 months, 1260 days. And so these cosmic signs could be as our Creator bring things back at the end of the age to the same, I guess what you would call same timekeeping system as at the beginning. And so that would certainly freak people out. Missler had a theory, and from his research, I forget if it was Saturn or Venus that had
geosynchronous orbit with Mars.
And
the orbit of Mars was double the orbit, the time of the orbit. Mars orbited the sun in 720 days. The Earth,
which is the red planet, which is known as the red planet. I'm
the
not
planet of war, right? In the Long Day of Joshua, it could be explained by a Mars near pass by or something like that.
Well, that was his theory. I mean, he wasn't dogmatic on it any more than I am, but he Chuck, I of all the pre-trib teachers that in the past, I enjoyed listening to him the most, and still listen to him. It's like nails on the chalkboard when it gets off into dispensational theology, but as far as his teaching, a solid guy, and if anybody can locate that video, it was really well done. I wish I could have found it, but I just remembered it. But it's the same thing, that basically time doesn't change, but the way we calculate time goes back to the 360 perfect day cycle. And again, I'm not dogmatic on it at all, but if that happened again and our orbit was affected and our time changed, do you not think that would freak out people, talking about, their hearts will fail them based on what they're seeing in the heavens.
Speaking of
and
that,
we both agree or believe that the veil is torn at the beginning of the day of the Lord. So obviously that's going to cause some consternation for those that are not of the faith, that have rejected Yeshua.
It's a great point. And I think the opening of the veil, the opening of the heavens, is a very dramatic, major event. All right. And I think that, if anything will demarcate the day of the Lord, it's that event. Right.
I believe it kicks off the day of the Lord. That is the kickoff day.
I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing.
Well, and I think the sign, he appears and he appears. There's a sign. Every eye shall see him, and I think at that point in time, those of Judah and even those of the house of Judah, others will see this, and they will, they're going to know their scriptures, and they're going to repent. And then they've got 10 days to, prior to Yom Kippurim. They're still going to be in their earthly bodies. But that's where sort of my understanding aligns a little bit with dispensationalism as far as Judah. It's just 10 days, not a 7-year period where the Father beats the snot out of all the Jews until they turn to Yeshua. There's a 10-day period to repent, realize your mistakes. It says they will mourn. I think that's in Zechariah. When they look to him, I think that's how you have translated that. Look to him,
right?
That who they pierced, and I believe you've got a sign. I don't know if Yeshua is going to I don't know. It's going to be something supernatural, crazy, spooky, and it's going to cause a lot of people, like you say, to hide in the rocks and things of that nature.
Well, I want to look at Isaiah 13 because this is the same flavor. Wail, for the day of the Lord is at hand. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. Therefore, all hands will be limp. Every man's heart will melt, and they will be afraid. Pangs and sorrows will take hold of them. They will be in pain as a woman in childbirth. They'll be amazed at one another, and their faces will be like flames. Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel with both wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he will destroy its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be darkened in its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. And I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for the iniquity. I will halt the arrogance of the proud, and I will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. Right. So again, in the day of the Lord, this is what he's going to do. He's going to punish. Right. We see the same thing in Isaiah 24. 26. There we go. Verse 21. For the Lord comes out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity. Right. So when the Lord comes out of his place, that is the beginning of the day of the Lord. Right. That is what is kicking it off, is that Isaiah says, oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down. This is John in chapter 6, Revelation. He sees the heavens recede as a scroll. That's the beginning of the day of the Lord, not sooner. Right. So that's a real bummer for the pre-trib rapture people, because then they're going to be here. Right. We will not experience God's wrath insofar as he's pouring it out. When God is pouring it out, we're not part of that. But everything up until that point, well, we've been promised lots of tribulation.
One thing that, and again, part of the lady's questions earlier, where there's a separation between the Old Testament, and that's for the Jews, and that's, and then we got the New Testament, that's for Christians and everything. That's the problem here. Okay, I mean, it really is. You're trying to read the Bible as two different books for two different people versus one book and one story. His redemptive plan, and it just leads to confusion. But Doug, what you pointed out that verse about how he's going to come out of his place. I'm curious. I haven't looked at it, but when he returned to his place, is that the same exact Hebrew word from Hosea when it says, "I will go away and I'll return to my place until they acknowledge their offense"? He's leaving his place, as obviously at the beginning of the day of the Lord, and that's a question I will sometimes ask Orthodox Jewish friends, things of that nature, is when was Yah ever here that he had to return to his place for 2 days? And that they don't have, none of them have an answer for that other than, oh, you just don't understand, you silly Christian. I mean, really.
Yeah. 2 different words, by the way. One is ashuvah.
Is?
I will return ashuvah, and the other is otzi. I will, or the Lord will come out by otzi. Yeah.
Place is the word talking about.
Place?
The place. He returned to his place.
Hey, good to see ya.
Place.
So, elech ashuvah el makom.
I was wondering where you were.
So he's returning. He says, "Return to my place." I think the English is pretty good there. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'm sure they don't especially like that when you ask that question.
It's tough.
Yeah.
Makes them think.
Another passage we really should take a look at is Second Peter. Here we go. 2 Peter 3:10. All right, so let me back up just a little bit here. Right, so the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens pass away, right? So I think that underscores it. The day of the Lord. What happens in the day of the Lord? Well, the heavens are going to melt. Heavens are going to pass away with a great noise. The elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works in it will be burned up. So when do they pass away? Well, we just saw that essentially in Isaiah, but also in Revelation 6. So the sky receded as a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place, right? And this is what Isaiah 13, that everyone's going to be afraid and all this stuff. Isaiah chapter 2, they're going to go into the clefts of the rock. And so here in Revelation 6:15, the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave and every free man hid themselves in the caves and the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and the rocks, fall and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath has come. Who is able to stand? All right, so once again, even the people on planet Earth are acknowledging, this is the day of the Lord. This is the day of his great wrath, right? And that's what we saw in Malachi, the great and dreadful day, right? That Elijah is going to come before the great and dreadful day. In Joel, you're going to have the sun, the moon, the stars doing their thing before the great and dreadful day of the Lord, right? And then here these guys are saying, this is the dreadful day of the Lord, right? This is it. So, I mean, there's just so many passages that tell us that the day of the Lord is the moment, I should say, when Jesus returns. That's when it begins, and not before then. John, what are your deep thoughts? Share with us.
No, I was just going to point out too that I think this is one of where I think the post-trib and pre-wrath people disagree.
Disagree.
Yeah, in pre-wrath, the day of the Lord comes before that day of what I think is the Day of Atonement period. When the Lord returns. So that I'm just pointing out that that's a difference.
And that would be Nelson's. Go ahead, John. Sorry.
But no, I just think that it's pretty clear though that there are these cosmic signs that precede the day of the Lord, and so we need to deal with those and can't ignore them. And I don't think we can come in and say, well, this is the day of the Lord, this whole period. But okay, so is the rapture when these cosmic signs occur? And I don't know that anybody says that, but that's.
And Nelson, I would say Nelson and Sam and those guys, they've been on before. That's sort of his position is, and I'd love to have him on again, but I believe their understanding of the pre-wrath people, some of them view this judgment period, this judgment day, as 1 year. and that there will be, you know, in other words, a gathering, or I hate to say the word, a rapture prior, 1 year prior to the millennium beginning. And I will say this: the more and more I study it, I do see there may be a supernatural sealing, a supernatural gathering, supernatural protection of the elect through this period, not necessarily a glorification, the transformation into our immortal status. And that's where our preacher brothers just can't see that even if God were pouring his wrath out on the earth supernaturally, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in a furnace. They survived. Daniel was in the lion's den. The whole nation of Israel, for the final 7 plagues, didn't get touched. And what Yahweh did in 3,500 years ago, give or take, he can do that at the very end of this age and in the future. And so I never understood why people cannot believe that he can protect us through this tribulation, and even through some pouring out of wrath or judgments on this earth. I mean, I believe famine is coming. That is going to be a judgment. Even, and even the righteous get caught up in judgment sometimes, y'all. And worst thing scenario, you die, you go to Sheol, you're up under the altar, and you get resurrected. Just flesh.
Yeah, there's also a passage I've used when I teach on Ezekiel 23, but Ezekiel chapter 9, which talks about the people that are marked to be preserved during a time of judgment. They do receive a mark. And that's kind of an interesting parallel, though I think it parallels to the seal of the elect that Scott was just talking about.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I'm still open. So we have a question from.
Still open to what?
Well, I'm open to
that it happens
to be persuaded, I guess.
Oh.
I think personally the day of the Lord doesn't begin until the heavens are opened. That's my take on it.
Yeah,
whether people are protected, sure, maybe,
That's
possible.
my understanding. What do you mean possible? It's more than possible that people can be protected through. They can be protected even from the beast if they can be hidden. I mean, it even says hide yourself.
Yeah.
Hide. We're giving instructions to hide.
Yeah.
It doesn't say where yet.
Yeah, it just says in your chambers, which is pretty wide open.
Yeah.
I don't know where that is.
But again, if we're that terminal, if we're that terminal generation, he led Israel through the wilderness. He gave them signs. Why we think it won't be supernatural at the end of this age for his people is just beyond me. It's going to be off the chain biblical up in here.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, it's all going to be in the book Regenesis. It's coming. Hang in there. It's coming, guys. Hopefully I can share my perspective anyway. But it's an exciting novel coming your way. So this is from Cody. Do you believe Isaiah 26:20 is occurring in New Jerusalem as it hovers and the wrath is dispensed? The gathering of the elect to the clouds into New Jerusalem, and then closing the doors of their houses.
All right, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I see Isaiah or the New Jerusalem there, but so come, my people, enter your chambers and shut your doors behind you. Hide yourself, as it were, for a little moment until the indignation is past.
Yeah, I don't see that as supernatural, but I mean, we're being called. There's a come, and sort of like I was just saying, if we are that terminal generation and we happen to survive and we're through this, I do believe there will be instructions I do not believe that. Again, we've got these, whether we agree it's Elijah and Moses or the spirit of, or the corporate body, in which, regardless, it's going to be supernatural. I believe there will be prophets at that time who, and I think God will make it crystal clear as to, this is where I want you to go. Much like the first Exodus. It says the second Exodus is going to make the first one look like child's play. I mean, that's what the text says.
Yeah. Well, Catherine has a question about that. Could there be an Exodus associated with a refuge in the wilderness?
Pull up Ezekiel 20.
All right.
Down towards the bottom.
Towards the bottom.
Let's see here. I don't have the verse number memorized, but
all right. Let's see.
There, go up a little bit.
Okay.
Talking about where he gathers them out of their place, brings them under the rod for judgment, purges the rebels from among you. Again, this is just like him purging Korah, purging the 3,000 that were doing more than just bowing down to a golden calf. Judge the grumblers in the wilderness. I believe it's going to be something very similar. We've discussed this before. Some people interpret this that we're already in the wilderness of the peoples, of the nations, if you will, that we're sort of in that wilderness right now, in exile, because we're not in the land. Again, I'm not dogmatic on it, but if a cloud shows up supernaturally and a bunch of other people, like-minded people, are getting the same memo to follow that cloud and they're not nuts, it's who knows? I just think we all need to be sober, be alert, and be prepared. And it'll really help if we know our scripture and all scripture, as opposed to just what your pastor taught you or you listen to your favorite pre-trib teacher. And I respect the people that come on here that are pre-trib. At least they're getting exposed and getting their, getting exposed to a different interpretation and a different view. Because I think that's how we grow.
Right. I wanted to circle back to the whole Isaiah 26:20 thing. We're not told what your chambers refers to, your rooms, your chambers. I would not be surprised if it were some kind of a supernatural kind of thing, because we have at the end of this age, obviously the veil is going to come back. Jesus is coming. So he's telling people, look, I'm coming back. My fire is being poured out on planet Earth. So people will need some place to be hidden in that's separate from the planet. Now we know all the sinners are going to go hide in the clefts of the rock and the caves. So unless we join them there, it would suggest that there will be some other place that is not just physical, that it's maybe something that is supernatural.
Hey, for a deep dive on this, guys, Halise has been teaching the last 4 or 5 months about the footsteps of Messiah, and much like I've started to look at that passage in Isaiah about the man-child, about the child being born before the birth pangs, and then you've got the revelation, I forget which chapter right now, about the man-child being called up, and it's 12. And she's looking at it from a lot of other passages too, and especially about the tribulation being cut short. You would have to listen to several of her teachings, and they're long, but that's a show I'd like to do it maybe in 2 or 3 weeks, and I can have a time to go through. I've got some notes down, and we could go over it. But it's not a rapture per se, but it would be more like a bridal type selection and a supernatural sealing, and it could even be a gathering of the wheat. Perhaps this is on a future Shavuot where the wheat is gathered into the barn. But obviously Yeshua not openly returning until Yom Teruah, but the tribulation being cut short for the remnant to and you've got that 5-month period where those things are let out and it just happened, and it's going to be 150 days, but there's going to be this big judgment with these entities coming out from the bowels of the earth. I don't think it's coincidence that the flood was 150 days. So, but it could be that there is some type of gathering, even supernatural, prior to or at that 5-month window.
Yeah. So Cody has a follow-up thought, which I think is interesting. It seems to be during the day of the Lord, and it will take place after the gathering. I think that could correlate to the meeting him in the clouds, and then in the clouds being New Jerusalem, he says. And then Christopher suggests that chambers equals in my Father's house there are many rooms. That's kind of interesting. So yeah, I think it's entirely plausible that come by people enter into your chambers. Like they seem to know that they have a chamber to go to, and it's not a house, it's not a cave, apparently. It's something that is specially prepared that will actually protect them when the Lord comes back in flaming fire. So, I don't think it's impossible to suggest that it's in some sense off planet or out of this dimension to some degree. So, yeah, very cool. Oh, lots of great discussions here. Joel Blackford says a cheder in Hebrew, a room, is a traditional elementary school teaching.
Wherever you are on your e-commerce journey, just starting out, moving your physical store online.
Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. We have a very special episode for you today. For the first time ever, we have Tyler Gilreath, author of Gospel Over Gods, Jesus Christ, the Fallen Angels, and the Supernatural War of the Bible. If you're not familiar with his work yet, then you are in for a treat. Tyler is an avid Bible researcher, engaged writer, and dynamic speaker. He's earned degrees in both biblical studies and business, and he lives on the Gulf Coast with his loving wife and 2 children. Tyler Gilreath, welcome to the show, brother. How are you doing?
Josh, I'm doing well, man. I've been looking forward to getting on here with you and talking with you, and I really, really appreciate everything you do, and the invitation to come and talk to your audience for a while just means the world to me. So I appreciate that.
Oh, well, thank you. Honor is all mine, and I really enjoyed your book, and I really like the layout of it. For those who aren't yet familiar with you or your work, can you tell the audience some of your background, how you came to know Christ, and how that leads to what you do today?
Absolutely. So I was blessed. I had a great family growing up. I'm like a 4th or 5th generation preacher. So maybe it was kind of destined for me to always preach, but, I had that desire, at a young age. I wanted to share God's word. And so my dad's a minister, my brother's a minister, my granddad, great-grandfather. So, I'm just like, my cup is like running over. I'm just so blessed, to have such a great family. And so I had a great background, a great foundation in the Bible, but I wanted to really, preach and, be a proclaimer of God's word. So right out of high school, I did a little bit, kind of messed around like a lot of people in college and decided to get serious. And so I went to a small college in Memphis, Tennessee, a Bible college, and studied the Bible there. A really intense program. It was like, a 4-year degree compiled into 2 years. And so, enjoyed my time out there in Memphis, Tennessee. And then, God opened several opportunities for me to preach over the years. And now we're blessed to live here in Gulf Shores, Alabama. And I'm a minister here at a church. And so, it's just been a fun ride. And, I'm appreciating more and more, here am I, Lord, send me. And I try to embody that attitude. Wherever God wants me to go, I will go. And so, that's kind of a little bit about me. I have a beautiful wife. Her name is Nikki. And as you mentioned, I have 2 wonderful kids. And so I could not be any more blessed by God He has truly blessed me in so many ways. And so I appreciate you talking about my book. So I do have a copy here, and it's quite lengthy. It's 508 pages, and so there's a lot in there. And so I'm looking forward to some of the questions that you're going to ask me today about the book and how I came to write the book. So
yeah, definitely. Well, what I really appreciate about the structure of the book, like you said, it is lengthy, but it's really easy to read. For each chapter, you have sections like connecting the gospel, looking ahead, and one that I'm going to be utilizing a lot, answering your questions. And that makes it really easy. It makes it really easy to read, but it's also really informative as well. So let's start with one of the first questions that you answer in the book about Genesis 3:15. Take us back to the beginning in the Garden of Eden. What did your research turn up about the fall, and what are the offsprings of both the woman and the serpent outlined in Genesis 3:15?
That's a great question. And, I can't tell you how many times I read that passage, even preached that passage, and very little thought was given into what is the serpent seed? That famous Genesis 3:15 passage where, as soon as the Nahash, deceived mankind, God made a pretty bold proclamation. And that was, look, there's going to be this confrontation, there's going to be this this battle, and God was kind of predicting what was coming ahead. And that is, Eve would eventually have an offspring that would be the Savior. And we now know that's Jesus Christ. Of course, early on that was still very mysterious, very hidden. And God would give us pieces of who this seed was that would be man's victor. But for so long, it was kind of mysterious. And, when I read that passage, I always just thought about Christ and what Christ would do. He would crush the head of the serpent. But I never really gave too much time or attention to how the serpent would have a seed, offspring. And so several years ago, I had a good friend. In fact, it's in my introduction of the book. I had a good friend that challenged me on a lot of the spiritual things, spiritual warfare things that I talk about in my book. And so I began a search, I began a journey, and Genesis 3:15 was one of the first places that I really had to stop and think about. And so the question was, what's the serpent seed? Well, we see the serpent seed play out in many different ways. Sure, sometimes, there's passages that kind of lend itself to the idea that, Satan is the spiritual father of certain individuals, and anybody that follows in the path of the serpent certainly, sets themselves up for that. But there's something more at play in Genesis 3:15. And you really don't have to read very far in the biblical narrative before you're introduced to, that idea of the serpent seed, and that is in Genesis chapter 6 in verses 1-4. And so, in Genesis 6, 1-4, we're introduced to the idea of the B'nai Ha-Elohim, the sons of God. Of course, the Septuagint or the LXX, renders it the Angelan Theou, or the angels of God, went into the daughters of men and produced the Nephilim. And the Nephilim were mighty men of old, the men of great renown. And so the serpent seed is kind of twofold. It's, the spiritual, those who follow the Nahash, spiritually speaking, and then also those who, came from that forbidden union between angels and women. And that plays out in the rest of the biblical narrative, and I'm sure we're going to get into that, throughout the interview.
Oh yeah. Actually, we can skip to that too, because you write about that right after explaining Genesis 3:15 in your book. And a lot of people watching this show are probably already familiar with the basic story of Genesis 6, but you actually bring out some really interesting pieces of information about it that's most likely not commonly known. What can you tell us about the giants and the sons of God? What's come up in your research?
Introducing a new personalized storage organization solution that allows you to store and find items easily and quickly.
Well, most people don't want to talk about it because it's something that's so foreign to them. But one thing I've come to learn and appreciate is that, if we want to study the Bible, we have got to study it in its original context. And context is everything. If you take the Bible out of context, you can make it say just about anything you want.
Yeah.
And so one thing that any Bible student has to do is they have to make the decision, have to sacrifice their own beliefs, their own context, their own belief system if they want to recover the original message of Scripture. And so, the original context, comes from that ancient understanding that there were some divine beings whom rebelled, and they rebelled against Yahweh, the Elyon, the God, the Most High God. And of course, there's some Mesopotamian background in there. I'm sure some of your audience is familiar with that, the Alu. And I don't really get too much into that in my book. I know some other authors, Derek Gilbert, there at Skywatch, and of course, the great Michael Heiser talks about that in his book, Reversing Hermon. But in my book, I simply I take some time to listen to some ancient people, and I quote a lot of church fathers, historians, and whatnot. And one of the first extra biblical texts that I came across in my studies was Josephus. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard Josephus quoted from pulpits, from scholars, and whatnot, because he lived in a very ancient time, and he was very particular about how he recorded knowledge. And I was shocked when I first read Josephus in the Antiquities of the Jews, that he came out and said that those sons of God were the angels of God. And so you have very specific statements from very respected men such as Josephus, and a lot of the early church fathers, up until the time of Augustine of Hippo, 4th century, believed and taught that the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, are the angels of God. And so, when did it go off the tracks? Well, it went off the tracks around the 4th century, when Augustine, in his writings, The City of God, was so influential that he ran all things supernatural out of the church. And so the reason that most Christians are unfamiliar with the ancient context of Genesis 6:1-4 is largely due to Augustine and his influential writing. And so I grew up in a faith that very much believes in trying to restore the old paths. And if we're serious about that, then we have got to, recover the ancient context of Genesis 6:1-4. And so between the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are, invaluable, the Dead Sea Scrolls really revolutionized the way that we understand God and history and theology. And, sometimes we like to be hard on the guys that came before us and say, well, I can't believe they couldn't figure this out. Well, we discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947. And so when we discovered those scrolls, it really was revolutionary. We were given insight into ancient texts that formerly we were just unaware of. And so it took a while for those Dead Sea Scrolls to come into a place where people could access them and study them. And so there was this tipping point, and I think we're seeing it now, where a lot of scholars are being heavily influenced when they study those ancient documents from Qumran. And so, to answer your question, the Nephilim, they are the offspring of women and angels, and that was the understanding in the ancient world. And so, if we're serious about recovering those ancient contexts, then we will adopt and welcome those ancient understandings.
Amen. I'm really glad that you brought up the Dead Sea Scrolls, because that completely revolutionized even the way that I view a lot of stuff in the Bible. You brought up a really good example. A lot of times we as Christians are hard on the ancient people. Like, how did they not see Jesus coming? Like, how did they not see it? Well, it turns out when we read the Dead Sea Scrolls, it turns out there actually was a faction of Jewish people that were expecting Jesus, that were expecting the Messiah to be God incarnate. And like 11Q Melchizedek is one of the most amazing documents I've ever read in terms of the identity of the Messiah, written a couple hundred years before Jesus was born. So I mean, they some of them actually did see it coming, but some of them chose not to see it coming because, as you said, we have the offspring, the kind of spiritual offspring of the serpent, the followers of Satan and the Pharisees and Sadducees. It's an amazing story. And speaking of the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of them that most people have at least heard of is the Book of Enoch. And what does the Book of Enoch have to add? And should we even take it seriously? Was it written by Enoch himself?
You know, that's a great question, and that's really what most people want to know. Now, before I answer this question, I would encourage you to study the Book of Enoch, simply because the ancient Jews and early Christians studied the material. And so sometimes we fall into this trap where, if it's not in the 66 books of the Bible, it's not important, or it has no value, and that's just not true. There were a lot of books that were studied and were given a lot of respect in the Second Temple period and also in the early church. We have the 66 books in our Bible, but understand that there are other canons out there that people follow. And the Book of Enoch is it's a book that is canonized in the Ethiopian Bible. That's the only really I guess Christian faith group that considers the Book of Enoch canonical. But it would be very foreign to, the Second Temple Jews and also the first century, second century, third century Christians. If we say, don't study that material, they would think you're crazy.
Right.
What do you mean? I mean, it's like sitting on the shelf of every, bookshelf in every home. I mean, it was ubiquitous. It was everywhere. People were studying it. They were talking about it, and it really framed their worldview. And so the question came, is Enoch, written by Enoch? And the reason why it was so highly debated, especially in the first century, is because, Jude's use of it. Jude quotes from the Book of Enoch on several places in Jude's small treatise there. And so that really gave it a lot of credibility that a lot of people really didn't like. It made them uncomfortable. In fact, so much so that the Book of Jude almost didn't make it in the canon because of its use of the Book of Enoch. And so, that's the question, though. Did Enoch write the Book of Enoch? And perhaps we will never fully know, did he write the entire book or not? I certainly believe that there are parts of it that obviously he did write. And, Jude talks about those things. And so I believe, the Watchers narrative of the 200 Watchers that descended on Mount Hermon, I look at that as a historical event that is true. I don't see any reason to doubt that event because in my book and other books by other authors, it's pointed out that Jesus does very specific things that relate back to that narrative of the fallen angels who descended on Mount Hermon and made the pact to corrupt humanity. In fact, as you know, Josh, the Mount of Transfiguration was, Mount Hermon.
Yeah.
For years, they thought, it was other sites or other mountains, but it was simply not. And I go into that in my book, and I would encourage other people to research this. But the very mountain that Jesus descended to reveal himself to all of the world or to all of the powers of darkness was the very mountain of corruption. It was that very mountain of Bashan that you read about a lot of times in the Old Testament. That was a very sinister place, and it didn't lose, its sinister motif in the New Testament because it was a place of great corruption. It was a place of idol worship. It was a place of veneration to the gods. And so Jesus chose that site to reveal himself to the powers of darkness, to show him that who he was and why he was here. And he told his disciples, hey, see this rock? I'm going to build my church upon this rock of rebellion, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it or shall not withstand it. And so I believe, I look at the book of Enoch as, since I grew up not believing it to be canonical, I don't necessarily read it in a canonical light, but I do read it in a light that really framed the worldview of, the apostles, of Jesus, of, Second Temple Jews. And so, the reason why the book of Enoch is not considered canonical is simply because, we don't have great documentation prior to the Dead Sea Scrolls. If I'm not mistaken, what we found in the Dead Sea Scrolls was Aramaic. I believe Enoch was written in Aramaic, and we don't have any Hebrew, Paleo-Hebrew, certainly to say that this material is much older. But, there is a precedent set by the Essenes at Qumran, and they certainly believe that Enoch was inspired of God. I mean, they certainly believe that it was, just as important to preserve as all the other books that they esteem very highly. And so, it just depends on what group you're talking to. Some groups, simply reject it, say don't read it. Some groups embrace it and say this is inspired of God. But I would encourage you to do your own homework if you're watching this interview, because the book of Enoch has a lot of great insight. And as I showed and laid out in my book, there are a lot of literary touch points in the New Testament that relate directly to the book of Enoch.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. I think that's a really good way of looking at it, because some, like you said, some people go too far and they say, you shouldn't even read it. Some people go too far in the other direction and say, no, we absolutely have to put it in the Bible. It's the 67th book of the Bible, and I don't agree with that either. But like you said, read it as history and as a document that framed the worldview of the ancients of the time. I think that's a great way to view it. Speaking of worldviews, there's actually something really interesting in the Tower of Babel incident. And when I first heard this from my good friend Dr. Michael Heiser that you mentioned earlier, this was another game changer for me. But you even bring out some ancient church fathers who talk about this. Can you explain the angelic allotment from Deuteronomy 32 and then what that has to do with the Tower of Babel?
Interesting.
Just 15 minutes and 9 seconds of exercise can uplift your mind, whether you run with strangers or walk with friends.
Absolutely. And so, there are 3 divine rebellions, and one of them is very familiar to most Christians, and that is, the fall in Eden. But what's unfamiliar is the other 2, and we already talked about Genesis 6. And so the third is, the Tower of Babel. And so Babel has always been a place in the Bible that has really troubled people for a long time, and it is quite confusing. And so, for years, most of our Bibles are based upon the Masoretic text. And so it's just a form of Hebrew, documents that are not as old as the Dead Sea Scrolls, but that's all we had for a long time. And so for generations, we were reading in our, English Bibles that when God divided the nations, he divided them according to the number of the sons of Yisro. And so, it's like nothing to see here. Move along, Bible student. Let's keep moving on. This is unimportant. But that really should have, been a red flag to a lot of people, because, Israel was not even a nation. At the Tower of Babel, you can't divide something according to something that doesn't exist. And so, that was very odd, but, for a long time, we didn't really question that. And so you had that. And then, of course, when we found the Dead Sea Scrolls in 47, the Dead Sea Scrolls says something very different than the Masoretic text. It said that when God divided nations, he divided it according to the number of the B'nai Ha-Elohim. The same structure, the same Hebrew construct that occurs 6 times in the Hebrew Bible. And I've always said it's best to let the Bible define its own terms. And so let's just say you're not sure what Genesis 6 means. Let's just say you're not sure what Deuteronomy 32 means. If you want to find out just who the B'nai Ha-Elohim are, then you have to look no further than the book of Job. The book of Job lays out 3 times, in Job chapter 1, and Job chapter 2, and Job chapter 38. In Job 38, it's one of the great classic definitions of who the sons of God are. It talks about when God laid the foundations of the earth, the sons of God shouted for joy. They sang. Well, that rules out, humans, because humans were not in existence when God laid the foundation of the earth. And so, to answer your question, we found the Dead Sea Scrolls in 47. The Dead Sea Scrolls said God divided the nations according to the number of the B'nai Ha-Elohim, the sons of God. Okay. Now, one thing that is really fascinating is if you're watching this, I would encourage you to look at these passages side by side with the LXX or the Septuagint. Okay. I think the Lexham English Septuagint is probably free online to look at, but there's some other ones, Britain, LXX and whatnot. But when you compare Deuteronomy 32, in fact, when you look at all these passages, Genesis 6, 1 through 4, Job chapter 1, Job chapter 2, Job 38, and Deuteronomy 32, on all of these, it says every time the Masoretic, every time the Dead Sea Scroll says B'nai Ha-Elohim, the Septuagint says angels of God. And so you got three different renderings. For a long time, we read sons of Israel, and we were ignoring this thing called the Septuagint, which we thought was not important. But when we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, we say, oh, the Dead Sea Scrolls, it actually lines up with the Septuagint and is consistent with the Septuagint. And so that's what happened at Babel. God divorced the nations. He allotted the nations to angelic beings, and he gave these nations languages. He set the bounds of the people, and he gave them certain Elohim to follow. Okay. These Elohim, or spiritual beings, were, I believe, once loyal to Yahweh, the God of the Bible. But as Psalm 82 reveals, these Elohim rebelled against God, and they led man astray. And that is the biblical and ancient understanding of why there are other Elohim or other small g gods in the Bible. I think most Christians grow up thinking, man, these nations are crazy. Why in the world are they worshiping things that don't exist? And I certainly did. And I certainly thought it was even stranger that, God's covenant people, Israel, who knew God's power, who saw God's power on, Mount Sinai when he delivered the law, those same people left Yahweh, the God of the Bible, and served other Elohim, other gods. And it was so strange to me. Why in the world would they leave somebody they knew that existed, that was powerful, and worship a being or worship other beings that don't exist? Well, it turns out, yeah, they kind of do exist. And, these are, powerful beings that fell from heaven. They fell from God's good standing, and they align themselves with the serpent of Genesis chapter 3. And so, that's the ancient understanding of the Deuteronomy 32 worldview and the allotment of God's worldview. And I'll tell you what's really telling, and I talk about this in my book, but the Hebrews were not the only people telling the story of the angelic allotment. When you go back and you read guys like Plato, who lived hundreds of years before Christ, they're very specific, and they say, the reason why the nations have gods is because they were allotted gods. They were allotted God. And so the Gentiles had the same cosmology, the same worldview as the Hebrews, and that is an allotment of God's worldview. We're not saying that Yahweh is going to be threatened in some way by these other Elohim, but he allows these other Elohim to function and to operate. And he, just like he allows us to have free will, he allows his angelic sons of God to also have free will. Just turns out these Elohim rebelled.
Yeah, definitely. That whole account is so fascinating, and it explains so much in our world. How did all these other religions get started? Why are there so many commonalities in these ancient histories, like you brought up too? Before we head to break, Tyler, if people want to get your book or find out more about you, where can they do that? Where can they follow you online?
Need it, find it, buy it. mykomatsu.com.au is a fast and easy one.
So it's certainly on Amazon. You can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it on Books A Million. You can buy it, I believe, Barnes and Noble as well now, and so it's on several different.
Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am very pleased to announce we have a returning guest tonight, Dr. Judd Burton, author of Interview with the Giant, plus several groundbreaking papers, and his website is burtonbeyond.com. If you'd like to learn more, we will have that link for you in the description below. Judd, it's great to have you back on the Sharpening Report. How are you doing?
Great to be back, Josh. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm really glad that you reached out and wanted to do this. This is one of my favorite topics, and I want to just jump right in because, as you know, because you actually contributed an interview for this, I have a new book coming out later this year on the Dead Sea Scrolls, Essenes, and Prophecy. And I know the whole topic of the Dead Sea Scrolls is something you've always had an interest in as well. What first led to that interest? How did you first get introduced to this topic, and what was it about it that you found so appealing?
Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls, I should say that I was exposed to them in church, but not in a churchy kind of a way. I guess might be a way because they were always this sort of nebulous, arcane set of documents, that the preacher would drop, every now and again, or you'd hear about it in Sunday school or something like that. It was they might as well have been written in Elvish, and stocked away in some cave in Middle Earth. But no, my exposure to them, just in terms of concept and name, was fairly early on, and I'm almost certain that it was a combination of my dad talking about who has taught Sunday school for decades, told me about this other arm of Judaism that existed during the Second Temple period in the first century, when Jesus was around. The Essenes, the Sadducees and the Pharisees were the ones that got top billing, but the Essenes were these strange fellows that don't get mentioned except for in the margins and the periphery of whatever lesson might be put forward. And the other exposure, I'm almost certain, was under the late Dr. George Knight, who was a mentor of mine, and he was the brother-in-law of our pastor, and would come over and do Bible studies. And he was an archaeologist too, and so a lot of his field experience helped to illustrate some pretty salient points in those studies. And I'm almost certain, as a youngster, I while picking his brain after these study sessions, I was probably the only 8 or 9 year old in a room full of men, in these January Bible studies that he would do, and he would graciously, answer all my questions. And I'm almost positive that part of my exposure was then, but it really wasn't until I got into college.
Payroll used to have you begging for a coffee break. Our automated payroll solution is accurate, fast, and SE.
I began to take Bible classes, theology classes, a history of biblical lands and the church, that I began to really sort of dive into the Dead Sea Scrolls proper. And I think really, as we talked about on our last show, the expedition to Banias or Paneas, Caesarea Philippi, that sort of set me down on this road, really sort of opened that world of the Dead Sea Scrolls up to me, particularly the apocryphal material that had to do with Mount Hermon, and that in a nutshell was kind of my introduction to the Dead Sea Scrolls. But as I say, it wasn't until I was actually prepping to leave for that expedition to Banias that I actually started reading, stuff like the Book of Enoch and the Genesis Apocryphon and Jubilees and some of the other stuff that's in the apocryphal cache of the Dead Sea Scrolls that shed light directly on the significance in the Jewish mind as to why that region was important on a cosmic level.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's so cool how, how pivotal but mysterious this group really is. Can you explain the landscape of the time of Jesus? Who were the main Jewish sects that you mentioned? Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes. And why is it that we don't actually see the word Essenes anywhere in the Gospels when they were clearly a well-known group? They were influential in the community at the time. What's the story there in the Gospels? Why don't we see Essenes mentioned?
Well, they, of course, as listeners will probably be familiar with, the main three, and there certainly were other sects of Judaism.
Yeah.
But particularly during such a tumultuous time as the first century AD, some of those are combinations of religious and political movements like the Zealots. But the big three were the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the Essenes, with the third one being the lesser of the three in terms of number.
Yeah.
But not influence, as I think you and I would agree on. But the Sadducees were really they were the temple bureaucracy. They were the overarching sort of theocratic court, if you will, consisting, of course, of priests. And the Pharisees were they're often referred to as the scribes and elders in the Gospels and the New Testament. And these were basically the lawyers and scholars of all of the, not just the Mosaic Law, but all the minutiae and commentary that went along with them. That's why they're the most haggling of Jesus's. Haggling is probably not the right word, but the most annoying of the crowds that Jesus draw, because they have all the little higgly-piggly questions for Jesus. And then you have the Essenes, who broke away as early as the 4th century, but probably into the 3rd century BC, excuse me. They had seen that the sort of corruption, it was a different kind of corruption in the Second Temple period, but the sort of, my take on it is that they saw the legalism that was growing was basically bastardizing the state of Judaism that Yahweh had presented to the Jews. And they were like, we're out of here. We're not going to be doing this anymore. And so they leave to the desert regions on the borders of the Transjordan and set up these communities, monastic communities, in essence, in which they practiced a form of Judaism that they felt called to practice. It was an expectant, just from reading the literature, it was a more expectant, messianic-driven, apocalyptic-driven sect of Judaism than the other two were, which is why I think that a number of them, I think demonstrably, even not only from written material that we find from Jewish authors, but also outside authors, prove that these the Essenic Jews actually became, at least in some of their numbers, became Christians eventually because of the theology and the ritual that they practice, and a lot of the phraseology that they share with figures in the New Testament like John the Baptist and Jesus.
Yeah, and that was something that was really fascinating in my research as well. Just seeing that, like, once you really kind of get a grasp of the basics of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then what this group taught, what they believed, who they were, you actually do see quite a bit in the New Testament about it. I mean, in Acts, for example, I've come to believe that when, and I could be wrong on this, but I've come to believe there's at least a possibility when Paul was on the road to Damascus that might not have been Syria, but might have been Qumran, because in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they actually called their community Damascus in a couple different places. And it makes more sense why, Paul would have to go to the temple to get letters of, authority or permission to be able to go to Damascus to persecute followers of the way. If that's all the way in Syria, I don't know if they would need permission from the temple in Israel. So there's little things like that when you take them and kind of group them together, they all pile up and kind of form this new picture. So how did these groups form? So we have a period of about 400 years that's called the silent years between the testaments. So we have the end of the Old Testament, everything makes sense, we kind of get the story, we know what's going on, and then you turn the page to the New Testament, and all of a sudden there's Pharisees and Sadducees. The whole structure in Israel is completely different. And on the surface, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of explanation for that. So what happened during what's called the 400 silent years that produced these three main groups, and how did the Dead Sea Scrolls actually come to be?
Well, there's certainly a lot of political upheaval in the region. Israel, once it's basically reconstituted, I should say Judah, once it's reconstituted after Babylonian captivity,
the knowledge glaring up.
There are these spurts of sovereignty that the country will enjoy, but those are relatively short-lived, because you eventually have outside powers vying for control over this stretch of land, which has been part of the history of ancient Israel, as you well know. But one of the big turning points certainly would have been the acquisition of this territory by Alexander and his Macedonian Empire. And we're talking mid to late 4th century BC, when all of that gets constituted. And of course, in the wake of his death in 325, that all the territory that he controlled is sort of divvied up amongst his generals. And the Ptolemies have the Levant initially, but the Seleucids will actually battle the Ptolemies at one point and gain control of the Levant. And so for the bulk of that period, you've got, like I say, you do have interregnums, if you will, of some Jewish control, but it's mainly a Hellenistic state at this point. And you have the basically the descendants of Seleucus in this point ruling over Israel. And of course, there's another upheaval once the Hellenistic control wanes, and that's in 63 BC.
I'm Tom Colicchio, and this is my Meetup with Meter. I love the meter because it syncs up to your smartphone. You can program a cook.
3 BC, when Pompey, one of the triumvirate generals and a close friend of Julius Caesar, will basically take the Eastern Mediterranean and hand it over to Rome. And so at that point, it comes directly under Roman control. And the Romans, of course, cared less about how you worshipped, and because most people in the Mediterranean basin were pagans, without getting too far off base, but they valued law and order and their view of social stability above everything else, which was causing the clash in a lot of cases with the Jews. And so this is sort of the political backdrop of that inter-biblical period, as it's sometimes called, those silent years, when a lot is actually taking place in terms of Jewish politics and Jewish theology. You have this. This is the period early on when you have the establishment of these sects of Judaism, Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes, and the lesser ones that certainly existed. But the Sadducees and the Pharisees basically were the theological overlords of Judaism at the time, and it's, you know, to the credit of the Essenes, I think they, you know, like I say, they saw the corruptive influence of the temple bureaucracy and the staunch, almost unloving execution of Judaism as something that was foreign to what Yahweh had given to the Hebrews, and so they broke apart. Heard a call. I firmly believe they heard a call to do that. So, you know, this sort of gives you some idea of politically what's happening in a backdrop during the interbiblical period. Like you say, if you're just reading the Bible through, and you hit the end of the Old Testament and you start into the New Testament, it's like, wait a second, did we miss did we miss a chapter or two in the book here? And without knowing something about the interbiblical period, that's what a through the Bible reading kind of feels like. But the fact of the matter is that there's a lot politically, historically, culturally, theologically that's significant that's going on during this period.
Yeah, definitely. And so the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves, are these like books from the main temple library that when these Jews or the sons of Zadok, you know, they go by different names, but that when this group broke off, did they bring these books from the temple library with them, or did they just copy them down once they got there? How did the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves actually come to be, and why do you think that they were left there in Qumran?
Well, and you bring up an interesting point. The Essenes are many scholars believe that they're sort of the intellectual, theological descendants of the Zadokite priests, who were the, Bible students. The Bible will recall were very staunch, probably the staunchest opponents of the pagan influences against Israel at the, in the both the more so the divided kingdom period, but there's definitely some connective tissue there. Now, in terms of the copies of material that they had with them, it's probably a mixed bag with the original stuff that they took from the temple. Probably some of it was original from the temple. Some of it's I think about 35 or 40% of the Dead Sea Scroll material, that is, the material that's been found at Qumran, is Hebrew Bible material, and then you've got about 30% or so of apocryphal stuff like Enoch and the Genesis Apocryphon and Jubilees, and then the rest of it is essentially, it has to do. It's like the monastic order. It has to do with their rites and rituals and rules.
Aveeno Skin Relief with prebiotic triple oat complex rebalances skin's microbiome. Aveeno.
Our end of financial year sale is now on. Stock up and save on all types of workwear and uniforms for all types of industries. Head in store for hot prices across the range, multi-buy discounts and more. Hurry, sale ends June 30.
Rules and things like that. All of the asceticism and ritual bathing in the mikvah and from the most sacred of rules down to the most earthly, mundane sorts of things. And so that's why I say that at least for that 35 or 40% of material that's Hebrew Bible, that's probably coming from the temple, it's probably a mixed bag. I mean, part of their function, after all, is scribal, and so they're definitely we definitely get a sense that there was scriptura at Qumran, so they would have been copying a lot of the stuff.
These documents were discovered not too long ago, a few decades ago. So what happened? Why were these left? Because in my research, it seems like the main narrative is kind of, they say, well, there was a big persecution, so they fled and they left all their books behind. But I don't know, because it sort of seems like they became Christians and took the gospel out to the nations. They were following the orders of the Great Commission. So do you think that them leaving this treasure trove of books, was that done intentionally? Was it done kind of haphazardly because they were trying to get out really fast because of a coming persecution? Or did they have something in mind for that? Why do you think all of these books were left where they were?
Well, you could certainly argue the persecution arm, but you run into things in stuff like Enoch about this literature being written for a later generation.
Right.
How they were going, how they were going to get that material to whatever generation needed it. This was probably the best thing that the Essenes thought they could do, was to bottle it up and protect it as much as they possibly could. Because, as you say, I mean, there's good evidence that many of them did become Christians, and that this sort of aha moment for me was in during the course of my dissertation. I read a number of Epiphanius's material, and of course he was an early church father who lived in the 4th century AD, and he associates the reason that I ran into them is because a group of them apparently ended up in the sort of general Bonius Caesarea Philippi region over the preceding centuries, and he names Bacchanatus or Botania, which is the Latinized version of that, as one of the regions that they ended up in. And he associates these two groups together in terms of their theology and sort of their theological trajectory. He mentions the Essenes and their order and their practices, and he also mentions he describes them also as the Elkosites and the Nazorians. And I believe that these are two groups that did end up converting to Christianity, just because of again the theological trajectory that they're taking and the way that Epiphanius is writing about them.
Yeah, it's fascinating looking into the history of that and seeing how it stretches across, into our church age today. You mentioned the Book of Enoch, and I wanted to ask you about the Book of Enoch because, of course, the Qumran community held it in high regards. How did they view the Book of Enoch during that, like the time of Jesus? How did they view that, or even the 2nd century BC, around that time? And then how are we as Christians today meant to understand the Book of Enoch? Because I think a lot of people have some confusion about this. You get extremes on both sides. You get Christians that say you absolutely shouldn't even look at it or you'll burst into flames, because it's so evil. Then you get other Christians, then you get other Christians that say, well, we need to put it in the Bible. It belongs in the Bible. It's the 67th book of the Bible. And, all this ridiculous stuff. So you get these extremes. And I think there's a lot of confusion about it. So how did the Qumran community view the Book of Enoch, and how are we as Christians today meant to understand it?
Well, again, sort of drilling down and back into the theology of the Qumran community, that the Essenes were they were an expectant group. They were clearly, in my mind, it seems that they were clearly they did everything that they did, from leaving the temple infrastructure and going out into the desert. They did all of that because they wanted to focus on one expectation, and that was the arrival of the Messiah. You know, you read their stuff, and it's apocalyptic. You know, it's expecting the next chapter. In other words, it's expecting the end of this age and the beginning of the next one, and wrapped up in all of that, of course. Wrapped up in all of that, of course, is the expectation that the Messiah is going to come back on the scene. And I tend to think that, particularly because the scholarship points to the 1st century AD kind of being the zenith of the Essene community. And if that's the case, that would certainly make sense when you start to look at the kind of stuff that John the Baptist is talking about, the phraseology that Jesus is also using. Just reading it from that, it looks like the Essene, at least some of the Essenes, recognize that, well, we don't have to wait anymore, because we've got this book that it has to be centuries, if not millennia, older than the actual writing down, because Enoch is the culmination of oral tradition, just like the entire Torah is the culmination of oral tradition. It existed in oral form long before it was ever written down. The Hebrews don't have a written language until the 10th or 9th century, the 11th or 10th century BC. And so in like manner, Enoch is kind of a culmination of all of that oral tradition. And clearly, because you I guess to sort of use a Jungian phraseology, you get archetypes of not just the teacher or the Son of Man or the Messiah or whatever, but also the end of the age, and even the intimations of the Antichrist can be found in a lot of that. And so I think that because Jesus's ministry was so ambulatory, there would be Essenes that would be hearing a lot of this and putting two and two together and say, I think we've got our guy here. I don't think we have to wait much longer for this. And so, Enoch would have been, of central importance, I think, particularly in that zenith period of the 1st century AD.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You mentioned that Enoch is apocalyptic, and it obviously is. Do you believe that the Book of Enoch has accurate prophecy? And if so, what does it say about our time or our future? Can we glean anything from the Book of Enoch pertaining to our time today?
Again, I'm not a date setter, but by the same token, where Jesus chides the Pharisees for being able to predict when it was going to rain, but they couldn't read the signs of the times around them. I think in like manner, we can apply
Oh man, the remote.
Apply, the Book of Enoch to our own time, and the fact that it says that it was made for a generation in the future. Even if it isn't our exact generation, it speaks more to us than it did at the time that it was written. Then it was just a forewarning. Now it's a handbook in a lot of ways, and I think without getting too science fiction about things, because there's such commentary, in Enoch on the pre-flood world and what's going on with the Watchers and the Nephilim, we're at the point now to where that sort of combination of practical sciences and occult knowledge that the Watchers taught humanity. We're at the point now to where we're starting to see a lot of things that blur the line between science and magic. And I think if there's any commentary, I mean, my gosh, you know, the news about the chimera, the human monkey chimera came out, you know, and we've been doing that probably for decades. It's just that we just get to see the surface news about that. And we're in the quantum age right now. We have super colliders that are, you know, as we speak, probably creating artificial black holes. You know, and even the people that work at places like CERN report very, very strange things, you know, outside the realm of scientific quantification. Quantum computing in any other language would seem to be magic, because quantum computers dump their questions literally into other dimensions to derive the answers. So I think in a way, because of the manner in which this sort of new technology is unfolding, and perhaps even the purposes that it's being used for, I think that sort of points us back to what the Watchers were teaching humanity and why they were teaching it to them in the pre-flood world. That's one reason why I think Enoch is going to become more and more pertinent. As we see more of this, you know, being released to the public. You know, again, I'm not a date setter, and I'm certainly not a prophet, but again, it's hard to ignore the signs of the times. You know, that the kinds of events that happen in the pre-flood world are starting to, you know, unfold now. You know, and beyond that, the kind of lawlessness that was epiphenomenal of the activity of the Watchers and the Giants would seem to be pertinent as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's amazing to read through the Book of Enoch and see how relevant it actually is for our day today. And like you said, it's unique in the fact that it's more pertinent for today than it was when it was first written, which is absolutely amazing. And what's cool about it too is, you know, we have the Ethiopic version of Enoch, and that's really extensive. We have a lot there. And then in the Dead Sea Scrolls, to
It's Pride Game at the SCG and a Saturday night blockbuster. Join as a member and save up to 35% on match access.
to me, we have enough fragments to where you can compare the two and see they are extremely close. So much so that if people say, well, you know, the Ethiopic version could just be fabricated or made up, it's like, well, if that were true, they would have had to have known which parts of the Dead Sea Scroll version were going to degrade, you know, which parts were going to be left, and they would have had to fake around that. And I just don't see how that's even remotely possible. So in my opinion, based on these comparisons that we can look at, I think that, you know, the Ethiopic version isn't going to be a perfect translation, but I think it's really close. It's definitely close enough to where we can still get something from it. And so it's amazing that there is quite a bit in there about our day and what we're heading into. I'll tell you what, we're going to take a quick break, but before we do, Judd, where can people follow you online and get a hold of your materials?
Well, certainly they can look at burtonbeyond.com. The Institute of Biblical Anthropology website is tioba.org, and both of those are undergoing some much needed renovation right now. So if people will bear with me, Facebook, YouTube, I do several programs, the Beyond Report, Quick Classics, which is sort of Greek and Roman and Jewish classics that people can get snippets of, and occasionally Antiquity X and Sunday School X, which are more visually driven. Yeah, those are the big places.
Excellent. Well, we have a lot more to talk about, but we're going to do that in the members only section right after this. Dr. Ken Johnson and I, if those of you out there are familiar with Dr. Ken Johnson, he's been a guest on before. We're going to have him back on again to talk about this calendar. But he has a...
Many people dream of living the Hollywood lifestyle filled with fortune, fame, and success. Today's guest lived that lifestyle and is here to reveal how much of this industry holds a dark underbelly that profits from the destruction and manipulation of the human soul. Welcome everybody to Skywatch TV. I'm Joe Horn. Ladies and gentlemen, we are joined again by the young people of Christian Ministry Academy. And of course, they're in studio today. They know today's special guest and they can't wait to get started, and neither can I. So without further ado, our guest is an award-winning filmmaker, actor, director, and writer with work on dozens of motion pictures such as Dawn of the Living Dead and a variety of hit television shows such as Days of Our Lives, and creator of The Last Evangelist television show, David Heavener.
Thank you, Joe, but I'm not sure I can live up to everything you just said.
Well, and that was only a micro snapshot.
Oh, well, I'm glad we got a panel here because I'm going to give everything you asked me to them.
Okay, yeah. We'll have Josh and Derek answer your questions for you.
I'll tell you about David's life.
You know, literally, Drew and I were looking at bio information and we're like, where do we stop cutting? Literally, like, serious, where do you stop cutting? I mean, the resume is more than we have time to read in today's program. So, David, your experiences in Hollywood, and to be honest, more films than he can remember. We were talking about this a couple of days ago on the phone in prep for the show, and we're talking about films that go back into the 80s. And I'm asking him for details.
Yeah.
And he's trying to ponder if that was something having to do with Rambo or something having to do with a promotional spot that he did. Anyway, so we know that the plethora of work, your colorful journey through Hollywood, many, many years of good experiences, bad experiences. You've worked with many celebrities, and you've watched how Hollywood, as you've described to me recently, brings people up into this world of fortune and fame and the paparazzi and the cameras and the dream that so many pursue. And then you've watched them destroyed systematically by some of what is the dark underbelly of Hollywood itself, if not just people living out excess on their own without help from Hollywood, having access financially to all of their dreams, no more restraints. They can have whatever they want. Let's start off, though, for the audience at home that might be unfamiliar with your body of work. Let's kind of talk about how you got started in Hollywood, some of the projects you work with, maybe some of the celebrities you work with, and why so many refer to you as the king of the indie film.
That was Josh. You know, Joe, we have to go back another decade before that. I was a songwriter in Nashville. I wrote for Capitol. I was fortunate enough to have a couple of hit records, and I always wanted to have my music in movies. You know, you guys go to the movies and you watch and you go, wow, this is, you know, and, well, I said, I want my music in these movies. So I talked to my publisher and they said, well, go out to LA and pitch your songs. And so I thought, well, a good way to do that is to go to producers when they're doing what they call casting movies, you know, as they call a casting call. So I went to this casting call with an envelope in it with my cassette tape. Remember the cassette?
Yeah.
Let me explain what a cassette tape is.
Right.
My car still has a cassette tape. Right. It could be an 8-track, you know. So there was this little Asian guy casting a martial arts movie, and he was seeing these actors, and they were all going in doing this acting. Now, keep in mind, I didn't know anything about acting. I just wanted my music in movies, and so he saw me walk in. I was the last person. I wanted to give him my cassette tape. He said. He thought I was an actor. He says, you act like Clint Eastwood.
Okay.
And I said, no. I want to give you, no. You act like a Clint Eastwood. And he had his camera up there. And so I thought, well, what do I do? And so I always like to watch Dirty Harry. Now, you guys, let me explain who Dirty Harry is. So I did this. I remember years ago, I looked at the camera and said,
I know what you're thinking, punk. Did he fire 5 shots or only 4? In the midst of all this confusion, I kind of lost count myself. But you got to ask yourself this question, punk. Do you feel lucky? Make my day. So I did this Clint Eastwood impersonation. The next day, I got a call from this producer, and he said I had the part in the movie. There's 2 problems with this. Number 1 is I can't act. Number 2, it's a martial arts movie, and I can't even dance, Joe. And I turned to my roommate, who was a struggling actor trying to get a break. He says, dude, what's going on? I don't know. I'm in this movie. So I found myself on the set a week later in this martial arts movie, and I stumbled through it. Well, the reason I'm telling you this is because I was a person who you would never choose to be successful. I had no money. I had no talent. I had no connections. I had nothing. But see, this is what God does. He takes the ordinary and does extraordinary things.
Absolutely.
So over a period of the next 5 years, I found myself directing, starring, and producing in all these movies. And I got a call from HBO, and I thought it was a joke. And they said, this is HBO. I'd like to fly you to New York and talk to you. I said, yeah, right, sure. You know, at that time they didn't have cell phones. I hung up on them, you know. Let me explain to you guys what a regular phone is. Oh, it's an analog phone. But anyway, they flew me out there and they said, look, we can't afford Clint, but we want to hire you to make, you know, these Clint Eastwood lower budget. And so I made 7 of them for HBO.
Okay. And for those that don't know, David, you're a believer in Christ. And part of the focus of today's programs is to make people aware of 2 new Defender books that you've authored. The first being End Times Investigations with David Heavener. And I don't know if you can see this cool cover. You might want to put that one up on the screen. But also more of a devotional, inspirational book by David, True Power. And I'm going to read the subtitle, Access Your God-Given Power as a Child of God. So what I think makes you uniquely qualified, David, is the fact that you've got all of these many years in what you've described as kind of the dark underbelly of Hollywood. And like I said at the onset of the program, you've seen people destroyed by the power and the opportunity to seize whatever it is that they want without restraint. So you've explained a little bit about how you got started, but what was your motivation? Clearly you were more of a musician. Was there a part of this that became attractive for you?
Yeah, it's interesting, Joe, you asked that question because in this world of Hollywood, it's all make-believe. There's nothing real. You can't eat it, you can't drink it, you can't sleep, but you can't do anything with it. It's a delusion, and I'm going to get with this later with scripture. It talks about they'll become delusional in these last days. So what happened is you get into a world where you surround yourself with people that just agree with you all the time. Yes, people. So
yes,
are connected with reality. And here's the problem. I was a Christian, Joe, when I went into Hollywood, but I was like a brain dead Christian, right? I was like, I hate to say it, 99% of the Christians, you know, I was one of those. What does that mean? It means I had no spiritual integrity. And what does that mean? It means that I was 2 personalities. In Hollywood, I was the Hollywood David. When I went to church on Sunday, I was the church David.
Okay.
Until God brought me down one night, I'll never forget. I crashed, I burned, I melted. And when I arose, the Hollywood David merged with the God David, the church David. And when I came back up, I was one. It's called spiritual integrity. Here's the problem with this. Is that when you are integrated spiritually, that means wherever you go, you take God with you. When you go into church, you take the marketplace with you. You take what you do. You're one person. Here's the downside, Joe. You make everybody mad.
Okay. Derek shaking his head, yes.
Yeah. I can relate to this to a degree because I got into the broadcasting business. So yeah, I didn't see the Hollywood side of it, but as a radio broadcaster in top 40 radio. I made it to Philadelphia, which was market number 4. And at one point in my radio career, just because of the sheer number of people listening in that market, I was one of the top 20 most listened to nighttime radio personalities in America. Now, nobody knew who I was because they were all listening for the music. It was top 40. I was just there as the musical traffic cop, keep it moving and stay out of the way. But I understand what you're saying because I thought I was a Christian at that point in my life too, and couldn't figure out why. You know, here I was, one of the top jocks in America, and I couldn't figure out why I was unhappy.
Right. Something deep inside of you that doesn't feel right. And this is what we deal with. And this is what everyone out, these young people are going to deal with, is that no matter if you're an actor and you can be a plumber, you can be whatever, that you're going to have to choose who you're going to serve.
Absolutely.
And you're going to have to choose in these last days. You can no longer be lukewarm. Folks, I kind of feel for you because we're at a place now, you are going to make choices.
Right.
And if you stay in the middle, that's a choice.
Yeah.
But that's the choice that Jesus spewed out of his mouth, being lukewarm.
What was it at that point in your life that caused you to crash and burn and melt? Was there something going on, or did God just get you at a totally?
Yeah. This moment that you describe is finally both sides of the David kind of gel together.
I'm going to have to make this real quick because this is only a 4-hour show. But basically, through Hollywood, I had so much demon oppression on me.
Okay.
I had the demons of sexual perversion. I had the demons of witchcraft. I mean, I could name them, go on and on, which a lot is in the book.
Right.
And as a Christian, I believe, I don't know what you guys think about this. I do not believe you can be possessed as a Christian, meaning taken over, because when you're a Christian, your body
I agree with
is the
that.
temple of God and there cannot live too.
That's
But
right.
you can be oppressed.
Sure.
Yes.
I had so much oppression on me that I was literally losing my mind. So turning to alcohol and anything to medicate yourself.
Right.
And through all this, I knew it was wrong. I said, God, I can't do this anymore. Take me out. Beam me up, Scotty, because I don't want to go through this pain anymore. So that's what did it. It was having all those demons around me, not understanding at the time, but when I crashed, burned, came up to spiritual integrity, boom, they were all gone.
Do you think people that watched you, though, from the outside just saw success, happy, life in the fast lane? Do you think there were those that were keen, that kind of knew you well enough to know something was off? And the reason I ask is because, you know what I mean? When you don't really know someone, you just see what you think you see.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I've tried to tell my kids, you know, that money and fame and TV and like none of that is what makes you happy.
Right.
You'll always be busy with the question of why am I here?
Yeah.
You will never be satisfied until you discover God's calling on your life. You can run from it. You can acknowledge that he exists, or you can obfuscate that and decide that you were not created to be submissive to a creator.
Mm-hmm.
It makes no difference. You will never be content until you find this calling for your life. So I'm just wondering if people saw you and thought, man, I'd like to be David. I want all this influence. I want to work with A-stars and make movies. Or if it was more obvious, withdrawn and
they wanted the first, what you said, they want to be, look, people come to Hollywood and I'm going to tell you my take on it. Most people that come to Hollywood are broken.
Yeah.
They're broken people. They're trying to fix something within themselves. So therefore they want to be an actor or an actress. Why? Because they want to be loved. You see, when we turn God out, put him on the outside, we turn to people to love us, acceptance. Right?
That's the radio business too. It's just that we were the people who weren't pretty enough to be on camera.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, these gals over here, we can talk pretty now. So I'll ask you guys. So when you turned to people and wanted acceptance, or did you? I don't know. Maybe.
Well, when I was 16, so this was 30 years ago, I had a brief stint in the modeling industry. And so I went through my own version of the same kinds of things you guys are talking about. And I came to a point where I had to decide, what is this kind of acceptance worth to me? And ultimately, I was never the size they wanted because of how small they want people to be. Yeah. And there's a whole story in my own life, and I won't take over this episode to talk about it, but learning a lot of exactly what you're saying. That a lot of this really is about acceptance. And, people ultimately, what do we need? What were we innately created for?
Yeah. Right.
Communion with our Savior and community with each other.
Yes.
And when we don't have either of those, we'll fill that hole with something else.
Right.
And when you're in a place where you're seeing this illusion of what other people are living, and you have this kind of oppression like what you're talking about, I'm sure that it can make people very desperate. And then, of course, the lengths that you'll go to fill that void increase with everything that didn't satisfy.
You're right, Allie, because this is where the demons come in. They take advantage of the situation. They say, oh, he turned from God, turned into people. This is the devil's playground. This is where they get to play. I will say this, Joe. Through all the people wanting to come into my life, and they'll say anything, do anything to have a part in the movie.
Of course.
People would come up to me a lot and say, I don't understand what's going on with you, but you have some kind of magic on your life. Somebody somewhere
cares about you. Somebody, they were trying to talk about God. They didn't
Yeah.
understand how to do it.
Right.
And all through, they would come up, even people that worked for me said, you know, David, you're the luckiest guy in the world. How does this happen to you? See, this was God. This whole thing about bringing me into Hollywood and taking me where I need to be, which is here now, all this was planned from the very beginning.
Yeah.
In spite of ourselves. You know, we keep jumping off track, and God uses whatever we do and puts us back and helps us end up right back where we are, Joe.
I want to read the subtitle to your book, End Times Investigations, because I think it's kind of a tell what a reader might find inside that kind of chronologically organizes some of David's experiences in Hollywood. Murder, Hollywood mind control, demons, SRA, aliens, demon portals, astral projection, and much more. So based on the subtitle of your own book, and we're going to show you in just a few minutes how you can get a copy of this book, it sounds like it is a smorgasbord of spiritual influence and a minefield of opportunities and temptations and influences and gatekeepers that are leveraging maybe the possibility of a role if you were to fill in the blank favor to me. And I'm sure that not every person in Hollywood is being controlled by this. But as David has explained, so many of the people he saw come there, in his view, were broken to start with. They're coming there to fill something that's wrong with them as a person. In your book, End Times Investigations, you talk about Hollywood mind control. What are some of the ways that Hollywood is brainwashing the minds of maybe the actors as well as the viewers?
Well, anyone that says Hollywood does not have an agenda, that they do not control your mind, I'm here to tell you, and it will shock you, when I sat down with some of these big studios, I'd mentioned one earlier, and said, we want this, it's like baking a cake. Here's the ingredients. And of course, the God side of me was in shock. The other part of me that was turning away from God was saying, okay, I'll do it, right?
Right.
What does this mean? This means that from the very beginning, Satan has jumped into the Hollywood system, and it is selling a bill of goods to us, and it does it through advertising. And if you go back to World War II, you go to a theater, and of course they needed to raise money, and so they created a war. And now they got a war that costs money, so they need to get money from somebody. They sold what they call war bonds. So if you go and you watch me, you'd sell the war bonds. So then they said, well, you know, theaters aren't good enough. Now we've got the R-rated, we've got the even X-rated, but we got to get into people's homes. How can we do that? Television. So television was created where they could actually put a box in everybody's home. And who did they go after? Well, first of all, Satan goes after the family. Starts with the father first.
Yep.
But then he saw we could get right to the mother through soap operas, which I was on soap opera Days of Our Lives. And I'm telling you, women became addicted to this. Sure, you guys may not connect to that because of how young you are, but years ago, they would follow these stories. And so what would happen, these soap operas dealt with sexual immorality. It was tons of drama, dysfunctional family.
Sure.
But it glorified it.
Yeah.
It glorified it. And so Satan was able to get to the housewife. Why? They call it soap operas. They sold her soap, Palmolive, see? But they weren't just selling soap.
Right.
They were selling satanic influence upon the housewife. So then, from television, Satan says, I need to get into the home privately. You see, TV is like a broadcast. It can be controlled by the FCC. We don't like that. Do you remember the VHS?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
We rented one night because we didn't even own one.
You didn't own one?
When we were kids, yeah, Dad rented one and rented like a cartoon or something.
Right. Well,
A
you
Disney
rent
cartoon.
one. They used to rent them. They had things called Blockbusters. You could rent them. Well, how do you think all these VHS machines got into the home? I mean, did they just one day pop up? And why would they put VHS machines in a home if there's no VHS tapes?
Right.
They did it through pornography. See, people wanted to sit in the privacy of their own homes. And then all of a sudden, Satan says, now we got enough of these machines in the homes. Let's now start putting movies in. And so they started releasing movies. Then it went to DVDs, right? Let me explain to you guys what a DVD is. So this is where we are now, Joe, is that now we're into social media, okay?
Right.
And
And you're kind of skipping over multiple years because there's not enough time with just a few minutes left on the clock.
yeah, there's not
to
enough
cover it
years
all. Right.
to cover it all. But be aware, and I'll tell you this: FANG, the FANGs, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, they've all conjugated in a certain part of California. Is there an agenda? You bet there's an agenda.
Yeah.
But I won't say it now. It's in the book. There's one company that will arise. It's around it right now. It will suck up all these other companies, and it will be the mother, what I call the highway of the Antichrist. You guys need to be aware of this because you're young. If the Lord doesn't come back and we're gone, you're going to have to.
That's right.
To endure this.
That's right. It's all in the book. And ladies and gentlemen, we want to make sure that you know how to get a copy of this book as well as True Power. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go anywhere.
Satan is setting up the end times beast system as we speak, but the church is fighting back. Skywatch TV is proud to present the David Heavener special offer. When you order David Heavener's new books, End Times Investigations with David Heavener and True Power from the Skywatch TV store, you'll also receive Allie Henson and Donna Howell's jaw-dropping expose entitled Occultianity on DVD, where they detail how the complacency of the mainstream church has allowed it to be subtly transformed into a cult. With over 35 years as a Hollywood filmmaker with experience in mental health, David Heavener has very unique insights into the dark underbelly of the movie and television industry and is ready to reveal how the media machine as a whole is one of the main tools setting up the final beast system of the Antichrist and Satan himself. In his book, End Times Investigations with David Heavener, you will learn about the Hollywood mind control machine and the deep state's new media partner, the associations between antipsychotic drugs, shock therapy, and the film The Exorcist, the connection between Jeffrey Epstein, the Holocaust, and if German scientists are still doing Nazi-esque procedures today, and the demonic connection between Charles Manson, Jeffrey Dahmer, and many other demented criminal minds. Also included in this special offer, the new book, True Power, a war manual for every soldier in God's army. In these perilous times, more are in danger of being deceived by lying signs and wonders than ever before. In True Power, you will discover the power of fearing the Lord, the origin of true power, if you ever sold or traded away your power, and the power of the Watch Warrior. But that's not all. In this must-have collection, you will also receive Occultianity, how the End Times Church is forming now in preparation of Antichrist. In this exclusive DVD, Donna Howell and Allie Henson walk you step by step through the well-laid plans of an occult oligarchy who are, as we speak, advancing the way for the system of Antichrist, all while a silent, complacent church has forgotten the true power of the body of Christ and are inadvertently laying the foundation for the bloodiest cult the world has ever seen. Sold separately, these items hold a retail value of over $70. Yours now for your donation of only $35 plus shipping and handling. This is a last day's warning that all true believers must have that will equip God's anointed with the knowledge and power they need to set people free from the powers of deception. This collection is available only while supplies last, so don't delay. The David Heavener special offer, available now at skywatchtvstore.com. Order now or call 1-844-750-4985.
Welcome back to Skywatch TV. I'm Joe Horn. We're in studio today with David Heavener, and we're talking about his new book, End Times Investigations, and also True Power. And I want to hit the ground running, David, with just a few minutes left on the clock, because I feel like it's really important. We've talked about some of the dark and just glazing the surface. You cannot do this book in one 25-minute program. But what can we as Christians do? Because I think it's important that we focus on the what to do about some of this, as people are being brainwashed by their social media, the movies that they're watching, the TV programs that have literally been written to seduce children into finding vampires sexual, and almost hypnotizing them without their consent into things like witchcraft and making it normal. Now, the things that maybe our grandfathers would have puked over are now just common everyday handheld device streaming content. Do you feel like we're being force-fed an agenda?
Absolutely. It's past that now. It's not force-fed. We're actually in a hospital. We're on a machine that's keeping the body alive. It's gone to that level now. Okay. What do we do? First of all, I call it the 3 W's. We have to wake up, we have to watch,
Yeah.
we have to warn. Now, I'm sorry to inform you, but now that you know the truth, it's up to you to start watching and start warning other people.
Yeah.
Okay, that's just the way it goes.
Yep.
Joe, here's the thing, is that you can't go out and just raise a political flag. That's important, okay? But that's not what's going to solve this, right? It's a spiritual issue. We have to fly spiritually.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? We're soldiers in God's army, all right? And this is where a lot of Christians, they don't want to hear this message, but it needs to be said. Satan has soldiers. And if you think for one moment they're not sitting back and trying to come up with a plan to take us out,
Yeah.
they are. We as God's soldiers need to step up to the plate. We need to train, we need to educate, and we need to support each other. All right, that's number one. That's kind of in the physical, you might say, but you are the soldier of God. You have a position, you have a post that you need to man, and when you're not there, someone else has to pick up the slack, right? Okay, now past that, what do? We have to understand that our understanding is not important. It's God's understanding. We can't lean upon what we see and what our little computer mind comes up with the solution. We have the Holy Spirit inside of us, okay? We have to start listening to God. Don't sit around and, start asking people, what do you think? Give me your opinion. Derek, give me your opinion. Josh, would you? It's okay to get people's, your peers, your friends. It's okay to, hey, what do you think? But then you take that and you put it to the side and you go to God and say, God,
Yeah.
you tell me, what do I do?
Right.
That's absolutely.
What am I supposed to do? Because everyone has a specific mission that they need to do. Now, God will speak to you. He speaks to me, speaks to all of us, and he'll guide you. And he may not even tell you what he's saying, but he will lead you through a set of circumstances. And I'm seeing this now with the book and with the ministry that we're doing, that we're all doing. And I watch you guys and what God's been doing with this ministry here at Skywatch. And I'm going, these guys don't even know what they're doing, but God does. Does that make sense?
That's because you've met us now.
And I can tell you they don't know what they're doing. I'm in good company. Okay? So having said all that, don't sit there and say, I'm waiting for God's voice. He may not speak to you. He'll speak to you through circumstances. Just pray, trust him with it, and then watch him go to work. And don't try to undo God's miracles, because he's waiting for him to do a miracle in your life.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to sum it up by this. We have what we call God's power in us, which I call true power. This true power was given to us when we became Christians. It was transferred to us. And this is why I believe God inspired me to write this book. I believe God wrote the book, if I could be so bold, okay? Because I'm not really could write this. We've lost, the Christianity, the church has lost its ability to tap in to power. If we could understand that when we walk into a room, that demons tremble, if we understand and use our true power, that is the key.
And we're going to be talking about that in the days ahead. So don't lose your train of thought, David.
Okay, I won't.
Unfortunately, we're all out of time, but next week, David Heavener returns to talk about how Hollywood has been laying the groundwork for the Antichrist, the beast system, and even the arrival of aliens. You're not going to want to miss it. For everybody here on panel, David, thank you so much for being here today. Everybody in studio, I'm Joe Horn. Keep your eyes on the trot.
Okay, guys, I'll see you tomorrow. Already got tomorrow's stream lined up. Looks interesting. So, okay, guys, God bless. Love ya.